Thanks for coming tonight. Marilyn, can you call the roll, please?
Member O'Bear?
Here.
Member Rita Daniels?
Here.
Member Dillon?
Here.
Member Gretsch?
Here.
Member Kelly?
Here.
Member Swinehart? Here. Member Thomas?
Here.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Couple of housekeeping things. We have, first up, we have public comments, but I don't know, Marilyn, if we have anything. Nobody's out in the crowd right now, so the public comments, at the beginning part of the meeting, we might have a comment, I believe, at the end of the meeting that's not agenda related. And then I also just want to remind you that as sometimes these meetings can run long because we have a lot of content to cover. If you have to use the bathroom or anything like that, please feel free to get up and get a drink of water or whatever. So, but I guess we can kind of just dive right in. So I hope you guys all had a nice long weekend. And let's get started. We have first up on here, you guys, we have the district policy updates. Second reading, Mr. Pietrowski.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. We do have the second reading of the district policy updates. These are the same policies that we brought forward to the Board of Education at the September meeting of the Committee of the Whole, as well as the regular meeting for a first read. There have been no changes to any of these policy recommendations from the first reading until now, but as a reminder, we did have the policies broken up into three main sections. The first section being that these are policies that we are recommending for a 5-year review. There are no changes to these policies. That's just part of the 5-year review cycle that the Illinois Association of School Boards recommends. There are 9 policies that fall under this section. Section 2 are policies that IASB is recommending we adopt. The changes to those policies are strictly administrative in nature. They do not have any substantive changes to how these policies are interpreted or how we put them into place. And so we are recommending those as well too. Those are there are 4 policies that fall into this section, and then finally section 3. We do have 9 policies where there are some changes that are more substantive in nature than just updates to legal references or footnotes. Those are policies that have been reviewed not only by the Illinois Association of School Boards, but then also by the district administrative team and our legal counsel. Again, those are 9 policies that we have reviewed, and we have brought forward the recommended changes to the Board of Education. Again, there are no changes from what was discussed back in September at the Committee of the Whole and the regular meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have on any of these policies.
I brought up some concerns about the public participation policy last time. I've since then had a chance to talk with Carrie and kind of ran a couple scenarios through and how we would potentially handle them and the type of latitude that we have at the meetings if an issue is bubbling or if we have an unexpected amount of people and how we would handle that. And so I think given the latitude that it seems like we have, my concerns have been resolved.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you guys. Anybody else have anything else on any of the other policies that we discussed last month?
Just regarding the Title I programs, I know that this is just a kind of an update, but in the past have we developed like a district level parent-family engagement plan? Like, has there been a plan?
Yes. As it relates to Title I, yes, Scott, did you want to?
That communicated to, because I know that it's also, I thought it was supposed to be communicated out to families who were touched by Title I.
Yeah, so we've included it in our student handbook. So the parent community, the parent handbook is in that, the compact is in the school handbook. And then I host a meeting. Because of the pandemic, we had no one attend that meeting despite sending out emails to those families affected. But we do that annually. That's part of our Title I requirements.
Scott, when does that email usually go out?
Usually goes out in the spring, so we can review the compact.
Would the meeting be in the spring too, then, if somebody was attending?
Right.
The year before that I had the meeting, I had one attendee. So it actually, Jennifer Rowe and I have talked a little bit about how we can maybe better connect with those parents. We've looked at possibly doing something before an open house or a time when people are coming already. It's because we are we're not a school-wide Title I program, we're targeted. It's a different challenge to get the parents to come out for those meetings. And in my 16 years, the most we've ever had at a meeting is 3. The one time we did do something before open house and we had a few people come in addition, but we enticed them with parking and food. And we didn't have very many people turn out even then, so. It's something I would love to improve upon, but it's a challenge.
Right, because I think, because again, the purpose is also to get parent input and feedback regarding the programs that touch their children that are under Title I. And if we're not getting a lot of participation, then, I hope that we do figure out a way that we can increase, because this is an area where there are a lot of programs that are supposed to be touching children that also affect the achievement gap that could be improved upon.
So we can certainly look at the way that we communicate that and attract more parents to that meeting, for sure.
I've also seen how other schools have stopped having a meeting and have done more surveying. There's more touchstones, ways to connect with parents. And when I was at the Illinois Title I directors meetings 2 weeks ago, I attended a session on it as well. It's a challenge that everyone had with the pandemic, and it's because we don't have specific Title I classes. It's also people aren't sure why they're getting the information. A lot of times I'll get people calling and asking why am I being invited. I explain to them, and then they say they're not interested in coming.
I don't know geographically, what the challenges might be, or, but perhaps partnering with some of the schools that feed into LT and acknowledging there may be transportation challenges for families. Maybe there's I'm sure with all the creativity in the room that there's a good chance that we'll have increased attendance with some new ideas. That's a good point.
And will those new ideas be then addressed for the upcoming spring?
Correct. We want to make sure we do it, especially given the pandemic and where we were last spring. When we used to have a humanities meeting, that was our Title I meeting, so we had a better turnout when we had a humanities meeting. But more and more that humanities meeting was not only less attended, it also wasn't really the core of a Title I program, so we made some changes there too. We also changed the way we place students in humanities, so the meeting was not as beneficial for everyone.
And Scott, I'm sorry if I missed this. How many, just broadly, either percentage-wise or number-wise, how many, we would have 2 parents show up out of how many invitees?
It's based on our students with financial need.
Okay.
Those are the ones that are invited. That being said, any program where students who are with financial need are a part of tangentially can participate or are available to use Title I funds, so it opens up quite a bit. Like, we're using Title I funds for the care space, so we're helping to support that. We use Title I funds to buy Chromebooks for kids who are on free reduced lunch. So there's a number of things that we do with that money, including paying for different consultants, and John Crownapple has been paid for out of that money, that kind of stuff.
Oh,
So
okay, got it.
we offer a broad program targeting those particular students, but it's a very small number of those that come up.
How many did you say, do we reach out to?
About 15% of the families.
Yeah. Michael, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, but it's
You don't like it, neither do I.
concerning. It's just concerning because this is an area where the achievement gap is, where students are identified in the achievement gap and funds are allocated for that. And so part of this is also to get parent input
Yes. Yeah.
to see. And so if we're not figuring, and I understand the pandemic is a different year, but in prior years, if we're not engaging fully with the parents or those students who have been identified, I don't think it's necessarily just because of income, it also could be because of classes that they're put in too. Am I correct or not?
Based on those that invite, they've been based on the family income, and that's the number that's used to determine our funding. I mean, that being said, not everyone who's in humanities is low income, not everyone who's in a prep level class is low income. So, again, we have a relatively small percentage, unlike other schools that are school-wide with Title I, so we have targeted programming. So that's,
And this is in relationship to this one mandated parent meeting. We obviously have other ways that we reach out to all parents and get them on campus for a variety of events and things. But this is for this annual mandated meeting. But obviously, we can get creative about how we actively recruit them for this meeting too.
The question isn't that necessarily related to this policy as much as it's to what we're doing procedurally to support the policy, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so I think,
on that.
yeah,
Yep.
that's a really, really good point to bring up. So we probably need to look further in depth on those ways that we're reaching out to our parents. And to your point, Brian, there are other ways that we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Because I had a question too about the migrant students, because highlighted in green on page 27, I think it was, just showing that provide to the extent feasible. It was the family literacy programs. Is that something we've ever done or we would look to be doing? How would something like that work?
we've done different things. I can't recall anything we've done recently, nor that we've had a specific migratory student program. I mean, we've done partnering in the past with St. Cletus Church. They have a Spanish-speaking service. We used to have a apartment in the Lindsay homes that included some of that programming.
And
But I'm not aware of what we've done. I can see if we've done something recently.
well, and it looks like, I mean, that's new, right?
That's a new
Green-
part to
That's
the-
new,
right.
so that's something that we would want to have our
Yeah.
eye on, because, I mean, I guess I'm looking at that from the sense of like, it's a whole family kind of thing,
Right.
right? It's not just,
Right.
you know, our individual students, it's how we're reaching the parents, it's the whole family.
So what would that
So-
look like in practice?
Yeah, so I think, I just wanted to call attention to that, because I know, Scott, you had mentioned that before, some of the other, there were some really great ideas initiated, I know, in the past that did uniquely reach out to families. And then maybe over time, you know, maybe the need waned, but maybe it's resurfaced again as something that we'd probably want to consider. So, probably something that falls in line with some of the stuff that Dr. Rowe is going to be looking at very closely, so it's very timely.
It is, and I appreciate that, especially, we were just talking about the book club work that we're doing, and again, how do you engage with families? And for me, it's like, it's beginning to connect of, you know, extending outside of just the school community, you know, what are the community, you know, churches, other places where families that we can begin to connect with them. So sometimes that work can be collaboration with the school, reaching out into those community spaces. So that's definitely an area of growth for me to start working on.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
this one's a, you know, kind of a pretty significant change in some heavy lifting, so I'm excited. Thanks.
Well, in both areas, on the Title I, as you start to formulate these new ideas, as you kind of hit spring, would you be able to share with us, like, you know, the plans for spring, even if it's like in an update?
Yep.
You know, and then, you know, after what the outcome was, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've allocated money in our Title I funds to improve our networking and reaching out, so that's been a goal. It was, obviously Zoom wasn't friendly, and so, you know, I don't want a repeat of that.
Well, and it lines up with many of our other things, that initiatives and points of focus as well, so that's great.
Anybody else?
I would just like to chime in, Carrie, about the English learners, and there was a lot of conversations that were had, that I had with like Leslie and Dr. Waterman about the communication aspect, and just really appreciate your feedback that those plans and process to improve the communication, and, because my concern was not adhering to what the policy is within the
Right.
district.
Yep.
So-
Yeah, we obviously had a long conversation about the efforts to make sure that we're providing translation services in all of our communications, and it's something that's a priority, and we're going to continue to get better at that.
And it's been great to see, like, your newsletter that comes out has a translate option. And I'd like to see that for all the communication coming out, from Infinite Campus to, that's an add-on for the translation.
Right.
Those kind of things, just to see that continuing to go. So thank you.
Yep.
It's that whole family thing, right?
Right, I think it cross-references with the other ones, too.
Absolutely, yeah, this is a lot of work here. So thanks, yeah, and so following up on that would be great to get an update on how some of those things have evolved. Is that all we have for questions? Okay, good, Ed.
Thank you. And we would bring these forward for the second read and adoption, if the board sees fit, at Monday night's board meeting.
Thanks,
Then-
everybody.
Then moving on to the Human Resources Committee, the only items that we have for the Human Resources Committee this month are the two items that would be included on the consent agenda. Those are the employment recommendations for all of our employee work groups. Those are listed on page 36 and 37. I do just want to make two quick points. Being that we still have a week until the board meeting, there is a possibility that we would have some changes to this. We would make those revisions in advance of the board meeting and include them into board book if time allows, and if not, we would have those either at the board table or a notification prior to the board meeting in case there are any changes. I do want to highlight 3 staff members. We have 3 staff members, 1 for the certified staff and 2 for the classified staff who have given us their intent to retire. It actually looks like 2 on here, but Clay Caldwell, who originally gave us a resignation letter, he actually meant it to be a retirement letter. So when we have the formal board adoption, that last item will be for a retirement. So we thank all 3 of them for their service to LT, and service to LT over a long time between the 3 of those individuals, between John Cromfell, who is going to look to retire in subsequent school years, but Kevin McSwine within Buildings and Grounds, and Clay Caldwell within our paraeducator role. So we thank them for their service and wish them nothing but success in the future. And then finally, like I said, if there are any changes, we'll bring forward those changes to the board for the October 18th meeting.
Question for you on why, I just don't understand what the differences are. Why is there a leave of absence just for like a 2 to 3 week
Sure.
period?
Absolutely. So we have leaves of absence that are approved anytime it would fall under an approved leave of absence provision, whether it's the Family Medical Leave Act, whether it's a contractual provision. What we have used as the district is anything over 2 weeks, we would go through that formal leave of absence process. Sometimes we will see, like you see in this case, there's a leave of absence that goes up to a retirement. We would just put those 2 things together. One is handled separately than the other. But that's generally where you will see it. You won't see a leave of absence for really anything less than 2 weeks unless it's intermittent, and then it really doesn't have an end date. It'll have a start date. But all of the information regarding those leaves of absence requests come through my office, and I make sure that it's an appropriate request, that there is applicable programs or provisions within the contract for that person to do it. If it's being brought to the Board of Education, it's because we're supportive of that leave of absence. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Good. Next up, we have the 2021 tax levy. First reading, Mr. Stasia.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to try to be as efficient as possible here and walk you through what exactly the mechanics of the tax levy are. Purpose of tonight is not to determine final numbers. I have some numbers and I'll show you how I've derived those numbers. But I may make changes between now and November. This is just a first look. There'll be nothing to approve at the board meeting on Monday night of next week. The process is very similar to that of the budget in that we do have to have a tentative adopted at the November meeting and then a final at the December meeting. The documentation, the final documentation is due into the county office prior to the last Tuesday in December. So at our December board meeting, we would approve that final levy, and then I take that documentation down to the county. If you don't do it, they don't extend the tax levy for you, and we'll see why that would be detrimental here to District 204 in just a second. So that's sort of that procedural process. I'm going to start on page 44 and 45 because we're going to go back to last year's tax levy, which is our starting point for the next year. And so I'm not going to take you through all the math on this particular page, on page 44. It will start to become more clear as we go through the documents and walk through them. But where I am going to start is really on page 45. And you'll see down in the sort of the lower right-hand corner, there's a column that says 100% of burden in Cook County. And just below there, you'll see a number that's kind of $71,978,000. And that is the total of the cap funds that was our levy from the prior year. And what I mean by cap funds is that those fall under the tax cap legislation. The reason that those are noted as tax cap funds is because we are tax capped, and so therefore we can only increase that total dollar amount by a percentage, the CPI, of the prior year. And so we'll walk through that in just a second. And then you also have there the total non-cap funds, which is only one of our funds, which is our bond and interest fund. That is the fund of which we pay back our outstanding bonds from. And so there's a separate levy for that. There will be separate documentation for that levy, but we're not going to talk through that tonight. We'll do that in November because there is no pre-approval for that one in November. That can all be done in December. Confused already, right? Okay. I'm going to do my best not to take you there. So let's take that $71,978,000 number, and then we're going to go back to page 39. And so starting at the top there, you'll see the $71,978,000 number is our prior year aggregate extension in the operating funds, the cap funds. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index, in December of 2020 was 1.4%. So we were always a year in arrears on this, okay? So it was 1.4%. So our total aggregate levy on existing property can only increase by 1.4%. It's a little over $1 million, and it brings that new number to $72,986,000, okay? So that's the total in existing property that we can increase 1.4%. There's our first number. Now we go down to the second set of numbers there, the projected equalized assessed valuation. These numbers are projected. I will not know these numbers until we actually receive the final copy of the tax levy, which typically has been coming out around July, end of July. So I won't know these numbers. These are projected numbers. So I'm projecting an EAV of $3,629,000,000, which is actually down from the year prior, only because in that year prior we had an assessment. And typically, historically, when we have an assessment, the southern area of Cook County, they do the city of Chicago next year, our numbers actually go down by a factor of 2 to 3%. So historically, we're kind of using that same number, that same look in terms of where that's going. This is a really important number, the next one, the new property. And the reason I say that is because, as I mentioned earlier, the $71,978,000 multiplied by the 1.4% is on existing property. What the formula does is it pulls out this new property and says, okay, that number is not subject to the 1.4%. So this is anything that would be new construction, in the community. Now, is $60 million a realistic number? Probably not. If you look at the history, last year we were at $41 million, and most of that was attributable to the new homes that used to be on the Masonic properties, right? The trouble with that is those types of developments will continue to roll onto the tax rolls over 3 years, essentially. So it takes some time to catch up. But The reason I'm estimating it at $60 million is because if somehow I said, well, we're going to put $30 million in here, and that's all that we're going to levy for, and it came in at $45 million, the difference in that $15 million we lose, and we can never go back and recapture those dollars again. So we're much better off with a number that's higher than what we think we're going to have, leave ourselves some leeway, and then capture all of those dollars on that new property, any of that new construction. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, great. So following through there, then what we do is we take the, the $3,629,000,000, add $60 million to that, and then we get a new EAV of $3,689,000,000, okay, which is down there, EAV plus new property. Now again, because those numbers are estimated, the next line is also going to be estimated because now we're developing a tax rate based on these estimated numbers. So you take our new extension base, the $72,986,000, and you divide that by the projected EAV minus the new property, because they pull that new property number out. They don't include that as part of the original calculation. So then we come up with a new tax rate of 2.0107, okay? So that number essentially becomes what the expected tax rate would be if all of my numbers here are correct, and I know that they're not, but because we're making some estimates on these. Then we go down to the next column, the next set of line there, and we say the 2.107, now we go back and we multiply that by the entire EAV, including the new property, okay? So that gets us to a number of $74,192,648. So ultimately, if in fact we had that $60 million of new property, which we don't know that number, our calculated tax rate was the 2.0107. We would actually see another $1.2 million of additional money in the levy based on the new property. That's an ambitious number that generally I don't think is going to happen. I think will probably be in the $30 to $40 million range again, would be my guess. But again, I don't know that for sure. So that's why we're and I'm not completely sold on leaving it at $60 million, but I'll take a look through that as we go through here, through the next month. So I understand there's a lot of math there, but the way that this plays out essentially is that, again, we know we're going to get a little over $1 million on existing properties. The 1.4, by the way, is kind of a low number. Historically, the average has been about 1.8 to 2, and so the guaranteed new money is $1 million. We don't know what we're going to see from that new property number until we actually see the true tax rate and then we see the true amount of new property. And so just to kind of give you an idea, if in fact we saw something closer, we have 60 million. If we saw $30 million of new property and the tax rate was still somewhere in that 2 range, we'd probably see about $600,000 of new property, additional money on top of the $1 million that we have for the increase on existing properties. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope it does. I'm not trying to confuse anyone. It's not the easiest process to understand, and I fully understand that. But I think it's important that we have the understanding here at this level.
Oh, go ahead.
It doesn't hurt us at all to go higher.
It does not, except for the point that the district has typically gone through the process of the truth and taxation hearing. And I think that's a good process to go through regardless, and I say regardless because you're required to do it if your ask is more than 5%. We aren't going to be more than 5%, but the district has historically done that anyway, held the public hearing and gone through the truth and taxation process. So the more we add to that, Allison, to your point, if we say, well, let's go $100 million, our percentage is going to go higher, that we're going to advertise and say, well, we're actually looking for 5.5% here. The reality is we're not going to get there. And it's kind of confusing to people because then they see this and they say, well, why are you asking for 5.5%? And then we have to go back and explain, well, we're not really, we're trying to cover this number to make sure that we get everything that we're entitled to. So you know, we want to try to be reasonable, yet still cover ourselves as far as, you know, obtaining all that new property number that we can. Does that kind of make sense?
No, it definitely does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a similar question. You know, why not knock on the door of 5% and try
Yeah.
to go for as much if there's only downside risk or only risk to not being high enough?
Yeah, and look, at the end of the
Risk,
day,
but
the only
you're-
risk is that we're now putting this number out there that says, hey, look, we're asking you for 5% or 6% or whatever the number is. We still go through the tax, and you know, truth and taxation hearing. And then people have questions about, well, why are you going so high?
Right.
You know,
It's a balance, it
yeah.
sounds like.
And the answer is, look, we're not going to get this money. But I don't know that everyone truly understands that concept. And it's
Right.
an easy one to explain, let's put it that way. Because we do have to, the truth and taxation, we do have to publish in a local newspaper. And we'll put that information up on the website. And it's based on some numbers that you'll see here in just a couple of minutes.
And this is both residential and commercial, right?
All properties, all real property in the district, so it's residential, industrial, commercial. Yeah, any of those
Yep.
any properties that exist, that's who pays the property taxes. Okay?
Thanks.
Okay,
Deal.
hearing no other questions on that, let's go over to page 41. So this is where all of the math kind of comes together. And this is very similar to the spreadsheet that you saw with the county that I opened up with on page 44. And so in the upper left-hand corner, you start to see those numbers from the prior year mixed in now with the coming year, the 2021 year. And again, by the way, 2021, that is the real year because your property taxes are also a year in arrears that you pay for the prior year. So this levy coming up will be the 2021 tax levy. So you see the 2020 equalized assessed valuation at $3.8 billion. Again, we're looking at probably a decrease of about 4.6% based on, you know, historical numbers to that $3,629 million number. Add in the new property, there's our $3,689 million, or roughly a decrease of about 3%, which is, again, historically, that's what we would see. You know, I don't know, historically, though, in the last couple of years, hasn't necessarily played out the way you would expect. So then we go through, and then you see beginning on, you know, in that box there between lines 8 and lines 23. So then you see those projected rates. Again, those are all projected. Those are, I think, a good guess, but again, we'll have to wait and see until we know those final numbers. And there you see the total of the 2.017. Now it's broken out by a rate by each particular fund that we utilize. Then there's our 2020 levy extension. So that's the prior year, right? So there's the individual numbers that make up the original number we talked about, the $71,978,000. Now I've added numbers in for a projected levy that get us to the increase, the $1 million, the 1.4% of $72,986,203. Now, we also say, well, if we had $60 million of new property and we had that tax rate of 2.0107, we would see $1.2 million of additional money from that new property. And so then you take column C and column D, and in column L, you will see that the 58, for example, the education fund on line 12, $58,536,000 plus an additional $967,000 for new property gets us to a projected total levy of $59,503,793. And that follows all the way through for all of those funds. Now, going back to the percentage, again in column L, you'll notice that the increase, assuming all of these things happen, would be $2,214,000. It's a 3.08% increase over what we had in the prior year. So that's the number where if we bump this up to 100 million, you're going to start to see numbers that are closer to 4 and 5%, right? And that's the number we then advertise as part of the truth and taxation hearing. So, are there any questions on any of that? That's how I arrived at those numbers. Those would be in column L. Those would be projected numbers. And again, I tend not to make very many changes from the time that I put these together. Kind of the same thing with the budget. To what I'll be doing in November and December. I will continue to monitor these, see if there's any reason to change them. But these would be the numbers. They'll be close to this in some form or fashion. there's no changing the bottom number essentially unless we move the $60 million figure around. I may end up moving money between the funds to look at those based on what we think the expenses will be in the following year. But again, I think for the most part, this is going to hold true through November and December. Kind of moving down, then you see on line 28, bond and interest. And so that's that fund that I talked about that's not capped, right? So there's a separate levy for that. We actually have separate paperwork for that, but we're not going to go through that tonight. But bringing that forward, the 2020 levy extension was $2,641,000. The amount projected for 2021 is $2,575,000. That will actually get kicked up in the end because the county adds 4% to that number for the loss and cost factor. And so because that's not capped, that additional 4% will be added in. So that's why you see a number in 2021 that's a bit smaller than what you saw in 2020, but that number will also get kicked up to somewhere above $2,600,000. It'll be over that also. But for the purposes of what we're levying, it'll be $2,575,000. So then you get back down to column L, and you see that total there, the total levy being $76,768,000, which in aggregate, that is a 2.88% increase over the $74,620,000 in aggregate for that prior year, which includes all of the funds, the capped and the non-capped funds. You can see how important, just by these numbers, the tax levy is to District 204.
Yes.
This is roughly 90% of our total revenue. For better or worse, that's how the system operates. Because let's face it, these are real dollars to homeowners, people who are paying property tax bills, right? There are districts that don't have this type of a property base, and they rely on more money from the state of Illinois. You may recall from our budgeting discussions, we receive about $4.5 million from the state of Illinois annually. And so really, of the 93% of the local funds that we utilize, and, you know, like I said, roughly in this case, almost $77 million, you can see how important this is to District 204, and that almost all of our revenue comes from, with the exception of some smaller pieces, from this particular revenue source. And again, as I said, for better or worse, it's not our system, it's how the state of Illinois has set up their system. And so that's what we do, and that's what we follow, obviously, because we have to operate just like every other taxing body, and they all do the same thing. You know, all the taxing bodies do the same thing. It's the same process for them. They may have less funds, but that's what we do. Okay, are there any questions on that at all? I'm going to quickly flip over then to page 43. And again, based on all of our assumptions here, what I typically do is I'll look at this and I'll say, okay, what does this mean to homeowners? I don't typically go into the commercial and industrial, but what does this mean to homeowners? So I usually take 4 different valued properties because we have homes that are valued in the millions of dollars here in the district. And I go all the way down to, of those 4, I kind of break it up almost quarters. And we go down to something that would be close to $200,000 versus something over $1 million. And if you look at, beginning in column A, there's a property value on line 6, a home that had a property value of almost $1.2 million in 2020. The math follows through that particular homeowner would have paid $7,188, almost $7,200, just to District 204 alone. So that does not include any of the other taxing bodies, because I don't pull up their taxing rates, and I could, but I don't, and go through that exercise. But for District 204, $7,200. What does the increase of $1 million mean to this home? Well, if you look down on page 33, about $210 would be the increase, the annual increase for that particular home. And then I have them here for one that's about 700. I'm sorry, I missed the number there. Where was that? 776,000. $470,000 and $182,000, and so you can see those numbers going across what they would have paid essentially in 2020, and we know those are real numbers because we know the tax rate. this, again, everything down below line 19 is estimated, but if everything that plays itself out the way I have it here, this is how this would work. All right? The one part of the process that District 204 does not control is the assessment process. We have no hand in that. And so what ultimately can end up happening is that you can have pockets of the district that decrease in value. You can have pockets of the district that increase in value. So it's not accurate to say, well, it was a 1.4% increase to everybody. It's a 1.4% aggregate increase. And then who forms those pieces of the pie can certainly change based on the assessment process, which again, we have no part in that at all. That's done at the county assessor level, and they're the ones that handle that, along with the township assessors as well. So this gives you kind of an idea. Any questions on this at all? And there's one more point I'm going to talk about before we leave this for tonight.
Thank you for doing this exercise here. This is so helpful to see
Yeah.
the breakdown across, various property values, because, especially at the end of the day, I think that's some of the questions that, we'll be fielding, so.
Absolutely.
It's very helpful.
Yeah. And again, remember, this is an estimate.
Yeah.
So
Right,
this is our
but
best
for the
guess today.
non-finance person sitting here, it's very helpful.
Sure, good, I'm glad.
Because Brian, I was looking at the 6-year tax levy history too.
Yeah.
That kind of gives us a good sense of what we've kind of done historically.
That's right.
So just looking at the cap funds, that percentage is what we would look at, right? Is what we go to levy.
So when you look at, which line are you on there?
I was looking at 15 on page 42.
Yes. So the advertised percent change in the cap funds, that's what we actually put out there in the community, and we said, okay, this is what we're going to ask for, okay? And so going across on line 15, in 2015, we asked for an increase of 2.26%, and the reason that number was so low is if you look directly above it, the CPI was 0.8. So that's all that we were going to receive from that. The rest of it was going to come from the expected or, the sort of ballooned new property level to make sure that we captured everything.
Okay.
And then you see the advertised number for all funds down there, right? It's typically a little bit less, and that has to do with that decrease in the levy for bond and interest, even though the county kicks it up for us when it's all said and done.
Right. In theory, I guess, we could be asking for more.
You can ask for anything that, we could, in new property, we could
Right.
throw
Yes,
$700 million in there.
sure.
It doesn't matter, we're only going to take in dollars on what the actual number is.
Right.
That's all that happens.
Well,
Yeah.
but to your point, and making sure I understand as well, if we asked for more, you're not literally taxing or burdening existing homeowners.
Right.
It all comes through this new
That's right.
property
Right.
calculation.
That's right.
That will only come to be if there's actual,
That's exactly right.
there's no new property, if there's no new buildings, no new homes, that would be 0, and then this rate is not 3.08, it's mathematically lower.
Well, the rate will be the same.
Or sorry, not the rate, the increase.
Increase would
the
be less.
advertised-
That's right.
I'm gonna get my words right, the advertised percent change for uncapped funds. So
Got
it's
it.
sort of, yeah, it is a hard concept. It doesn't jump off the page as being that intuitive.
Yeah,
You've done a great job of explaining to all of us
well, good,
tonight,
I
so-
hope I am. I'm trying to not confuse everybody. And again, the purpose of tonight is just to look at this concept and okay, this is how this works, right? There's a lot of math here, and it does take some time to fully grasp the entire concept. So I'm trying to get to that point. But yeah, so you'll see again, tax year 2017 is in yellow because that was a reassessment year for us. And then 2020 is in yellow because that was a reassessment year for us. I'm on the history page there, on page 42. And so then that's when we would see, if you look at 2018, our EAV is down 3.12%, which that, again, if you went back to the prior years, if you went back to 2015, you would see a similar number. I don't have it on the page, but you would see 2015 was down, I think, about 3% as well.
Got it.
And then just to bring it all home or remind us, the relationship between, and I'm going to pick a number, the 2021 proposed levy, almost 8 million. That relationship to is it the current year budget? Or is this like this isn't a year in arrears or anything?
It's a great question.
And then how are you budgeting in the budget? Is it a little conservative versus this number because we don't know about the 60 million component with new property?
Yeah, so this year's budget is already set, and we know the number there.
Okay.
Because here's what happens. This is where it gets a little more confusing. So our budget starts July 1st and goes through June 30, okay? We know by the time we get to July, August, I will know what that dollar is. So everyone here lives in Cook County, and so you have a property tax bill that comes to you in February typically, usually due about March 1st, and then one that is due now October 1st, okay? So that spans, those collections span 2 different fiscal years. So one levy spans two fiscal years.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is, in a budget year, I will know the second collection number. So I budget for that number in appropriately. Then what the county does is on the first collection of the new levy, which is our second collection of the fiscal year, the one that happens in February, March, April, what they do is they send out tax bills that are only 55% of the prior year. And so I know that number as well. And so for the budgeting process, while it's a little complicated, it's somewhat easy because we know, okay, here's the number, here's what we collected from the earlier collection. And so in that first collection of a fiscal year, we kind of know how much we're going to collect. And then we certainly know how much the second collection is, which is the first collection of the next levy at 55%. So the county makes all of the adjustments on that second collection, the one that's September, October, November.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, I know, there's a lot of different years and things going on there, but that's how it works.
Okay.
So we typically have a pretty good understanding of when we budget for the levy, we have a pretty good understanding of where that's going to fall.
Yep. Great.
Any additional questions on that at all? There's one part of this that I need to mention as well. And, I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, I was
Oh,
gonna say,
sorry.
but wait, there's more, because I noticed that, and just,
Yes.
where, he's gonna get to it.
Yeah, so the last paragraph of my executive summary there talks about Public Act 102-0519. This was signed by the governor into law in August of this year. And so you've heard me talk about property tax refunds before. And we typically will budget for about $1.5 million to $2 million of refunds that are related to PTAB, Property Tax Appeal Board, certificates of error, the circuit court, people who go in and challenge their property taxes in circuit court. And this includes any property property tax owner can do this. So this is commercial, industrial. You may recall that we had, last year we went through the issue with UPS and had a settlement with them. They were originally looking for several $1 million back. We ended up settling on a few $100,000. So that's an example of the dollars that we would be giving back during a current year. And so if something settles, there are claims out there from 2016, 15, and even before that. If that settles this year, they take that money directly out of our distributions this year. Okay? Typically that's $1.5 million to $2 million. This new law requires the county to certify the total amount of refunds that District 204 and any taxing body gave back from November 1st through the end of October of that prior year. So they're supposed to certify these on November 15th. Once they do that, they will then be adding that dollar amount back into our 2021 tax levy. So what happens is essentially we're recapturing all of those dollars that we lost in a prior year. So the budget really won't be net zero because let's say we're anticipating more refunds or something along those lines. The budget itself won't be net zero, but it'll be pretty close because we'll be recapturing all of those dollars that we gave up in the prior year. Now, what does that mean? Well, that essentially, let's talk, we talked about $1 million, right, that we know from our 1.4%. Let's assume that we collect maybe another 400,000, 500,000 in new property from our, from the new property calculation, based on it being 30 million, something along those lines. We could see another we will see another $1.5 to $2 million added to our tax levy for the coming year, for 2021. Because we are now recapturing those dollars that we gave back in that prior year. So essentially, we could see an increase to our tax levy of $3 to $3.5 million in this next year. That, the dollar amounts that you saw that I gave you for the homeowners does not include that additional $1.5 to $2 million, but that's where that's going to be paid from. So it really takes all of the refunds, essentially, that we gave back, redistributes them to all of the taxpayers in the district, and then they are paid back to the district in that given year. So this is different. This is brand new. This is nothing that we've ever seen before. We typically would budget for $1.5 million to $2 million of refunds. They would be gone, and it would never show up as revenue. In the future, it's going to show up as revenue. And so that is also going to affect all of the property taxpayers in the district, because it's going to be an increase to the tax bill that's outside of the 1.4%. So it's again, for better or worse, it's the concept that is now going to be in place, and it's going to benefit the district as far as finances go, but there will be an effect to, taxpayers in the district, that's for sure. So it's something that, we're gonna go through this the first time, and we're gonna see how, it goes, but let's say we had $2 million, right, in refunds, and we're already close to $1.8 million through, when I had put this together. Let's say we get close to 2 million, somewhere in that ballpark. $1 million we know was a $210 increase on a $1 million home. Add another $2 million to that, the simple math would tell you that's a $600 increase in 1 year. So again, that's the simple math, but I also don't think it's too far off. And so you can almost, triple every one of the other increases that you see there for each one of those properties. Again, for better or worse, it's going to benefit the district financially.
But Brian, we won't see that, because it says for prior year, that's not like what happened with our settlement, or I should say, the refund we gave UPS last year. We're not gonna see that, or we will see that.
You will,
correct?
you will,
Okay.
yeah, because that was paid March of 20, if I
It
remember
was,
correctly.
yeah, I think, it was
So-
definitely, in December we talked about it.
Yeah.
And we,
Yeah, so that $200,000 that we paid to UPS, so that we gave back to them essentially, will be included in that November 1, through October of the next year count.
okay.
So yes, we will see those dollars essentially returned to the district.
Very interesting.
Yeah. There is some discussion, I will tell you, amongst my peers, that, is it something that, the board would say, well, we don't want to take this money back, we would somehow abate it and say, well, we're not going to take it back. There is some discussion about that, and I don't want to leave that out of the discussion. But I generally think most of the districts are going to be taking this money. Because for all the years that we've lost these dollars, it certainly has affected us. On a side note, we will also right now, for the following year, CPI is running, so that 1.4% that we see now, we will pick up the true number in December of this year, so coming up, and we'll get it about mid-January, so about 3 months from now, it's running over 5% for this year. So that's quite a difference from the 1.4.
Recent memories.
Really,
Yeah, inflation is here right now. I mean, there's no question, and that number certainly shows that. We won't talk about that number until a year from now. We'll know what that number is in January, but we'll start to have conversations about that, how that'll affect the tax levy for 2022, essentially.
don't want to get theoretical, but I feel like I'm this close to understanding this more fully, or I'm way off, is that, and not that you have to know the concept behind the Public Act, but in theory, are they saying we were right in total? Maybe just may have sprinkled the allocations across, not we, us, we, Cook County or whatever, across the, I'm going to say 100,000 residents, I'm making up numbers, 100,000 residents and commercial businesses. We've distributed the allocation incorrectly because these people were honored refunds. And so the rest of the people have to make all that up in the following year. Meaning if the refund related to one homeowner and they had a $2 million refund, this is silly numbers,
Yeah.
the balance of the whole community puts in the 2 million.
That's correct.
In the following year.
That's exactly
Will it be
right.
separate, do we know enough, is it sticking out on the tax bill, like a sort, like, is it separately line itemed on your tax bill to where someone could say, oh, this portion is that new concept, and,
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to
Okay.
that yet. I do know, Julie, you hit the, nail right on the head, the concept is exactly that.
okay,
And one of the challenges to this, look, this is how it stands right now. There's gonna probably be some challenges in Springfield on
Sure.
this. And one of the challenges is, take UPS for example, right? I just received a refund, right? And I fought for this. In theory, even I'm paying some of that
Right.
refund
Right.
back
yeah.
now.
In the subsequent,
That's exactly right. And so that, couple $100,000 will now be spread out amongst all of the property owners, including UPS. And they would be paying some of that back in addition. So I'm talking about this now as it stands. I don't know what's going to change, but this, as of today, this is the law. Will there be any changes? They talk about, in Springfield, they talk about trailing, cleanup bills, those types of things. Will something be put into this? I don't know.
Okay.
But as it stands right now, this is how it is.
thank you.
Sure. I'm sorry to take up so much time, and I
Well, there was a
certainly hope
lot, it was
that,
very layered, there was a lot going on.
yeah, there's a lot there.
So thanks for
So,
clarifying that.
there's nothing in October, this is just a first look. If you
Right.
have any questions,
Right.
please, give me a call, whatever, I'd be happy to talk that through. In November, we would adopt a tentative, and then in December, a final, because we do have to get those documents to the county. Like I said before, the last Tuesday in December, if we don't do that, they don't extend this money, and I guarantee you, we're gonna have a problem operating next year.
You don't want to do that. Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
If we're okay to move on then, we can move on to our strategic planning process. Dr.
All right.
Waterman.
Thank you, President Dillon. So I've had individual conversations with everyone at this table over the last several months. We had a collective discussion in early June at the board level. Our leadership team has talked about this for quite a while, just the interest in engaging in long-term strategic planning work in this district. Really taking a look at seeking stakeholder input, reviewing and analyzing data that first of all defines our current reality from both a qualitative and quantitative perspective, and then analyzing that data to set priorities, to set measurable goals, and then monitoring that progress along the way. It essentially allows us to kind of determine where we're at, where we want to ultimately be, how we're going to get there, the strategies we're going to employ to get there, and then how do we monitor it and make sure that we're making progress towards those goals. So I know that just in the conversations we've had together, I certainly believe this is a process that would be extremely valuable to District 204 because it would help us set those priorities. It would help us ensure that we're working towards a consistent vision from all aspects of our organization and help us develop consensus, maybe most importantly, on how we define success or how we measure success. So in July, based upon all those conversations we've had, and specifically at the board level in June, in July I began to identify some organizations that really help facilitate this work in school districts. Took a look at plans from 5 different companies, asked our district administrative team throughout the month of August to share their perspective on what they identify as the characteristics that lead to effective strategic plans. And really, during that whole feedback loop, identified some characteristics that kind of rose to the top. This idea of having a variety of stakeholder input was really important. Some of the plans we looked at were very limited in the amount of people that were actually involved in the decision-making, but also in the planning process. So having a large group to choose from was important. The transparency and the consistent going back and forth, like developing drafts, sharing them was also something that was very important. I also looked at just recent local success in our area with developing strategic plans in local school districts. The focus on analyzing data and setting specific measurable goals is something I know our leadership team is very passionate about. And then also from a simplistic perspective, from a transparency perspective also, having something that's easily articulated and understood by the entire community is something I think is very important in strategic planning. So based upon the review of all the different characteristics, criteria, looking at the different companies, I really believe that Consortium for Educational Change, CEC, best fits our needs at this time in terms of developing a plan and helping us facilitate this process in our community. So in the packet, you have a lot of information related to, first of all, just a simple cost proposal and kind of outline some of the steps that happen, but then also a more fleshed out PowerPoint that has some of the information in there as well. I just want to highlight a few of those. So from start to board consideration of a final plan, it really involves a group of about 50 to 60 individuals that are part of this. And we have some flexibility. I mean, there were some groups that said we really identify this, this many people, and other groups said you can have as many as you want. So we have some flexibility there, but I anticipate that if we choose to engage with Consortium for Educational Change, we'd be looking at a stakeholder group of around 50 to 60 people, maybe a little more than that. I don't anticipate it being any less than that. There's also a core team of about 8 to 10 that work with the consultant in between the sessions to help summarize, to help adopt drafts, and then obviously engage the larger stakeholder group throughout it as well. But it essentially involves 6 really important steps. There's an environmental scan, which will be really a combination of data that already exists along with data that we would have to collect, both qualitative data, quantitative data, perception data, academic data, social emotional data, all of that. And so that would be something that we would first start out with, just deciding what data points we need to collect to get a really good understanding of our current environment. There would be a half-day workshop that would be an orientation to what strategic planning is and walking through the steps with the entire stakeholder group of about 60 people. The next step would be a full-day data retreat that would essentially take a look at our environmental scan and analyze the data that we've chosen to collect before that. And then at the end of that, we're essentially developing a SWOT analysis. So we'd have an idea of what our strengths are, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats. And then the next step after that would be a full-day vision retreat. That's really going to give us an idea of, based upon all the data collected, based on all of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, we'll have a chance to really define where we want to be ultimately as a vision. And then I think more importantly, how do we want to be different in the future than we are today? How do we want to improve? What are our core values? What are our priorities? Those are all things that would be determined or discussed at the vision retreat. Then the next step would be setting that direction. So we've identified our core priorities and values. How do we get there? What are the strategies? What are we going to do to actually get us to that point? And then determining those high priority strategies to accomplish our ultimate goals. And then there would be a final half-day meeting to develop the plan. And then in between those steps, like as I said before, there's a lot of opportunity. I value this a lot, is to share this. So as these teams work together throughout the year to develop these drafts, sharing this information with our community along the way and getting feedback along the way so that the stakeholder group and the core team can continue to make adjustments and tweak the plan is something that is very important. And then ultimately, it leads to the entire board considering the plan. My hope would be in May, April or May, and the board would ultimately adopt the plan. But then throughout the process, like I said before, we have some flexibility on the stakeholders involved in the group, but I would anticipate we would have one board member on the core team, and we would have one or two board members on the stakeholder group as well. And then obviously the whole board is going to ultimately adopt the plan. So at this point, this is presented tonight as informational. What I would ask is, I'd ask the board to consider this. I'd like to put it on the agenda for next week and approve a contract to engage with CEC. If approved, then what we would do is we would engage with them, start the process, seeking, volunteers for the stakeholder group, getting all the information out, deciding what data we need to collect and what data we already have. As you can imagine, and we all know this, right? This is going to be a process, but I think a very valuable process that will hopefully culminate at the end of this year in the adoption of a plan that really presents a consistent vision for where we're going. So that's the 50,000-foot view of the goal. Happy to take questions or thoughts on this process.
I think it's great that you're taking it on, consistent with what vision and goals you've shared with us. I think I was surprised that we didn't have one in existence when I was running for school board. Someone suggested, go see what the strategic plan is for LT, and I just couldn't find it. So this is great, and it's typical, I think, that a little help from a consultant makes for a much richer product, right? And something
That's what we think.
probably helps. There's plenty of, internal, I don't know, unfortunately bias with the group, stakeholder group. Everyone will have a thought or two that they really want in there, and I think is part of the thought having an independent helper, consultant, to help kind of navigate through.
Yeah, I think it's also, there's just a value in having a framework that's been,
Okay.
kind of tried and true in other places as
Yeah.
well. It's not developing the goals, like we're going to tailor this to our community, right?
Sure,
But
sure.
But the process and the framework that we go through, it's been done before, which helps.
And we're not we're diverse and unique, but
Right.
we are not, I can't imagine we're so unique that this company wouldn't have at least some subsets of themes that they see a lot of places and be able to kind of help us expedite some of those
Right.
topics. Okay, great.
So what stood out, Brian, then, for consortium education over the other four consultants that you were?
So I would say I can talk about what I didn't see in some of the other companies. I don't want to obviously name by names, but some of the deficiencies that I saw were, one of the companies had a very small group. It was 10 people total, like from start to finish, worked on the plan, which I'm not a big fan of. There was another group that just had way too much flexibility. Their presentation was simply, we can kind of tailor this how you want, but they didn't have like a step-by-step process, and they didn't clearly articulate what happens during those steps as well, like CEC does. To me, it's laid out in a way that's very clear with data collection, SWOT analysis, setting a vision, adopting a plan. That's what I liked about it. And to be candid, having 60 people involved in this, I think, is helpful, but also having the opportunity to share it throughout the process with staff, community, students is also very important too.
I think that's a key point too, I'm curious. I mean, I don't want to get totally involved in all of the details, but I know a lot of what we've seen with strategic plans and would they be helping to facilitate how we share that information with the community and the public?
Yeah, my understanding is we have enough flexibility to kind of decide that, but we would work with a consultant that could help us with that. That's obviously done this in other schools too, so probably would have some great ideas on best practice of how that's been shared.
A different consultant? A different
No,
than
with
CEC?
CEC,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, no, with CEC, yeah.
And then I'm asking lots of questions, but
No,
I did have a
go.
lot of questions, like, too, I was looking at the costs of their plan, and there's two different costs, so there's total plan cost and then total plan cost, is that?
No, that's
supposed to be-
that's kind of like a running
Is
total.
it
So on the first page, yeah, it's a
continuation?
continuation.
Oh, it's a continuation to this,
Just,
but the
I
total
mean,
is the 16.
Obviously, cost is important to me.
Sure.
I didn't use it as the only measuring
Yeah,
stick,
yeah.
but this was by far the cheapest too, of the five.
Oh,
Wow, really?
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Brian's shaking his head. He's happy about that.
So I had a couple questions. So when we're sharing back out with the community, did they talk at all? And this might just come out in the planning process too. So if it's too in the weeds, that's fine. But I like the core group and the stakeholder group big enough to hit a lot of different pockets of our community. But when we share it out broadly, are there opportunities for
We can build-
mass
yep, we can
weighing
build
in?
that in.
Okay, that's
Yep.
good. And then it looks like they had a case study in here about District 155. So, I mean, what's the top line on, I mean, obviously it's a success story for them, but like what was the success for them as they walked through that case study or?
I would have to look at that in more detail. Like, I really looked a lot at what Hinsdale had done.
Okay.
They have UCEC as well, and so is Glenbard. So I was looking for high school, comparables, but I didn't dig too deeply into.
Well, I was going to ask that too. Do we know other schools that have worked with them? So that's fine too. And so that was a good, smooth process and.
Very much so. They both districts spoke highly of it. Both districts also like the outcomes of like what you end up with, the end product of having measurable goals and having people held accountable for those goals.
Yeah.
They spoke highly of CEC.
And then, because there's the getting to that point and the plan itself, but then there's the enacting of the plan and then how that comes to pass, and so those districts.
Which would be a whole other process, right?
Right,
So we
okay.
get to the end of this year, we have a plan in place, then it's really, and it kind of gets it in this packet, but it's how do you live that plan?
Yeah.
And how do you ensure that we are truly monitoring progress and following up? And that would be a whole other process we would go through.
Okay,
Mainly with our leadership team,
sure.
but certainly would involve a lot of other people as well.
Oh, so we could use them for
Yep.
like another phase. if
We
need
could,
to.
there's actually the districts I talked to, Hinsdale and Glenbard, they've kind of created their own living the plan format, but we could use what CEC has developed as well,
So is
or
that-
develop our own.
So is that like a dashboard,
Yeah,
like
Yep.
measurement dashboard at the end of all this
correct.
that is on a site or?
That's the transparency piece that I think would be really valuable. Like here's what we've identified as our priorities. Here's how we're going to measure those, the goals, and make that very transparent.
I've seen
This
that
is
on,
us, sorry.
I was just saying, I'd seen that on other sites where they show like kind of where they are in the process, so you know what goals and what have been hit, what targets have been hit along the way, so you can see where they're kind of at in the process. Because this is looking at it's 5-year, right?
It's really just adopting the plan, but I mean,
Okay.
throughout, like during this year, we're going to look out whatever amount of time we want to look out to determine where we want to be.
Will that environment scan include kind of like a resources assessment too, to make, not even personnel, but just, you're talking about dashboards and being able to, have the transparency that we're looking for? I would just,
Yeah, we
I
could,
would think that would be important too, to make sure that we have all the tools that we need to do that down the road.
yeah.
Here internally, you mean?
Yeah.
To be able to put that, to push the information out.
Right, or to get the information back, like all of that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, just to
Sure.
make sure, because when we talked about when you were explaining the environmental scan, it was a lot of data points about, academics and, social,
Yeah,
emotional.
and that's
and
going to be an important part of the discussion, because
Yeah.
we have, as we're going to see tonight, and as Katie will tell us, like, we have so much data available, so we really have to strike a balance between what we have that's existing versus what we want to collect
Yeah.
new, whether that's perception data or qualitative, quantitative data. We have a lot of, and we also just had a discussion this morning about the amount of times we survey our community already, and so we want to be very strategic about that and not over-surveying people. We were talking about the 5 essential survey today that we have to administer at some point, and so we have some flexibility there on to decide what data we currently want to use that we already have versus what we want to collect.
Right. And I think I agree that environmental scan is key.
Yep.
And really culling through the data and understanding, I mean, because some of the data that we have, particularly if it's perception data, we're in a very different position than we are now as a society. So I would anticipate and would hope that we'd be, and what I'm seeing here is such that it seems very inclusive and a lot of outreach. The success, of the strategic plan is in large part people and our community members and our stakeholder groups feeling like they've been able to have a voice in it and then buying into it. And if they don't feel like they've had a voice into it and that there was fair opportunity to have a voice into it, it can be a disaster on the other end. It could be work done for naught.
Yep.
Who else, when did District 155 do this?
I think they did it 3 years ago.
So they did it 3 years ago, so they're probably
Yeah.
2 years into the
Yep.
plan?
Right before COVID.
Okay. And what about Hinsdale?
They did theirs 3 years ago also.
Okay. And it sounds like you talked to different people
Yep.
within those groups. How many?
Not 155, but District
Hinsdale?
86 and District 87.
Which ones, 286 and?
86 and 87.
86 and 87, okay. How many strategic plans are CEC, how many are they taking on this year?
I have no idea. I can ask though. I'm not sure.
I mean, do they have different
They
groups?
have a group
Like-
of consultants
So-
so one consultant's assigned to a
Gotcha.
district, but I'm not sure how many they have total.
Okay, yeah, it's just, well, and
Yeah,
if they have
I
different.
can find out. Yeah.
Just trying to make sure we get the right attention and the.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll find out.
And then between the final two, I remember when you and I spoke about this, it was kind of, we were down to two groups. And while some of this information is great, or it seems like it's great, it really, like, we need the context, we would need the context of a presentation to really, like, understand their process a little more fully. So what separated CEC from the other group specifically?
The size of the group, the size of the stakeholder group
Okay.
that they recommended, and honestly, costs came into play with the final two.
Okay.
Significant cost difference. And
Okay.
again, not that that's the final measuring
Right.
stick, but it was enough to, where it was a factor.
And when the process begins, how, does CEC consult with us to help us figure out how we get to those 60 to 70 to 80 people?
Yep, there's, what we would do is we would develop a core team first, work with the consultant, and then basically make recommendations for what that stakeholder group would look like. And I've got I kind of sketched out a timeline of what I thought this could look like. If this all goes according to plan, my goal would be to have the half-day, do the environmental scan and the orientation to strategic planning prior to December, and then be in a position where we could do a full-day data retreat in December. The recommendation from CEC is that you stretch out each meeting by about a month. So you don't do this like week after week after week. So if we follow that timeline, we could do the full-day vision retreat in January, a full-day setting direction retreat in February or March, and then be in a position by early April to develop a final draft plan that would then be shared, and then May board consideration, and that way if we're backed up a little bit, we still have June before the end of the year.
So those retreat things, those retreat days, those are with the core group,
Those are with the stakeholder group. Yeah, those are with
coordinating 50 to 60
Yeah,
people.
exactly.
on a-
And that's why the flexibility is important, because we're going to invite a group of 60 to this, and we're going to have people gone every single meeting.
Okay.
Because it's impossible to get a date that works for.
Sure.
So you invite a big group from all different stakeholder groups, and you just know you're going to have some people that will, things come up, schedules conflict, but you have a big enough group to where it shouldn't impact.
And if you said the environmental scan and the half-day workshop in December and the full-day data retreat in December?
Yeah, no, well, the environmental scan is not really a meeting. We just have to decide what data we need, and putting
Yeah.
that together, that's gonna take some time. So
Yeah, that's what I was
I
wondering.
think if we were fortunate to be in a position where we could do the data retreat in December, that would be doable. It'd be ambitious, but it'd be doable.
Yeah. But you are anticipating that we're going to need some data
Oh, absolutely.
gathering, right?
Absolutely, yep. Yep.
And we can make it pretty clear too, what that stakeholder group looks like.
Mhm.
Obviously, being concerned
Yep.
that we're really casting a wide enough net to
Absolutely.
capture. You know,
Representative of our community.
Right,
Yep.
really, truly,
Because we want staff, students,
Getting-
parents, community members.
and different groups.
I think for
and
something like this too, we want to get
Voices.
parents who aren't here yet, like parents who don't have students here yet.
Yeah.
Well, and also community members who
Don't have-
have
yeah.
aged out, maybe they had
Yep.
students. And,
Right.
I mean, I do think it's, again, back to that inclusive and back to the buy-in.
Right.
Like, we really have to really have to go far and wide to make sure we have a representative group.
Right.
Business, I've mentioned this when we met, business owners in the community would be great to get. But.
Great connections with the incubator program that we could probably tap into.
Yeah, and I know you've talked about LTCAC, and I know that that's a group that we could tap into, but I wouldn't want to see that be the stakeholder group.
I could see them giving some input into like the draft plan at some point, like if the meetings line up, but I agree. I don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
Yep.
certainly a valuable group to tap into.
Like they have
but
a meeting on the
I-
calendar in April, I think.
Yeah.
If we're at a point where we have a draft plan, we could share that with them and
Yeah.
get feedback.
Yeah.
Because that's another 50 or 60 people that would have
Mhm.
some
Right.
buy into it.
Right.
Right.
Good. Looks like a plan.
And I guess the only other thing I want to add to that is, like, I always, after reading
Yep.
what is proposed from a financial standpoint too, I always think, you know, are there things that fall out of scope that if we ask for, they're going to say, well, that's an additional, I mean, have I'm surprised they haven't added anything like that. It just seems.
No, I mean, there are going to be costs outside of the scope that aren't on here, but not with CEC. I mean, we're going to probably
Okay. Well,
we're going
right.
to feed the stakeholder group, and we'll do some,
Okay.
you know, there'll be
So
some
there'll be
costs
things
with
that we
collecting
might
data.
absorb on
Yeah,
ourselves,
yeah.
or if it's like a survey or something like that we decide
Right.
we would take that on ourselves.
Yes.
again.
Like to your point, this would not be the final cost. This is the final cost with CEC.
Sure, okay,
Yep.
that makes sense. And I just wanted to know what we were able to take on and what they are handling,
Right.
so.
Yep.
Frank, could you ask them to maybe provide a couple more schools that they've worked with, particularly if they have a couple more high schools?
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
would be great. And they're pretty Midwest oriented, as
They
I
are.
recall, right? I
They
mean,
are.
most of their work is here, but I think they go to a few other states.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay.
And on the work plan proposal, if you look at the, you know, it's really divided between the on-campus facilitation versus the work that happens outside. So the readiness number 2, the findings of the data retreat, the findings of the vision retreat, the draft of the plan, the strategic plan, final documents, those aren't on-campus meetings, those are outside of that's the work that happens in between the stakeholder groups and all the input that happens.
I do. So looking, I just, pulling up one quickly on my computer here, it's like a 2-page snapshot is what I saw from District 89. But like seeing some of the others are much longer. Is there any value, do you think, in having a shorter one versus a longer strategic plan with more background information?
I would love to have the group give some input into that.
So they can change that?
They can change
Okay,
that. But
so that's not-
personally, I think at minimum, we have to have something simple that articulates very clearly what our vision is, what our goals are in kind of one graphic, one snapshot. But there's obviously going to be a lot more behind that in terms of what the goals mean and who's the implementation of it.
And they'll provide that for
Yes.
what we have? Okay.
Yep.
Just
Yep.
seeing like
Yep.
different districts really quick, providing what they have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen it go to that level of detail. It's pretty helpful.
And a lot of that can come during the implementation of the plan as well. So you get to the adoption where you have that very clear vision of what we're trying to accomplish, and then the implementation piece comes to the.
And that could be something
measure-
that they would
develop,
provide to be
that
able to.
we evolve into that. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and just, I think I'm tracking with you guys, but the adoption of the strategic plan generally includes somewhat high level, but very distinct.
Easily understood,
easily
very
understood
clear. Yep,
goals.
Yep.
And then after, just to make sure that the process, because I don't want to assume that the ones I've been involved in the past are going to flow the same way. But after the board adopts that plan, then the administration would go and put together with your cabinet and your team, the action plans, the
Strategies, how we're
initiatives,
going to achieve it,
strategies,
how we're going to achieve
whatever
the
you're going to
goals.
call it. Then you would bring that back to the board to give the board purview into how we're going to accomplish these. That would include timelines and, spots where we're going to look at metrics and measurements and how we're doing and so forth. But that becomes, CEC at that point is not involved any longer.
We can decide at that point to continue to engage with them to help us through that living process. That's really a decision we could make
Yeah,
down the road.
but this is
It's an
really
option.
just getting us to
It's
the
getting us
adoption
to
of
the
that.
adoption of the
Yes.
plan,
Okay.
correct. Yep.
Okay.
Well, I mean, in the adoption of the plan, it has accountability of who's going to be accountable at each of those points.
No, so we wouldn't get to the point where the goal this year is to identify what our priorities are and what our goals are going to be. So that's what the board will be adopting. Then the living part of the plan, the implementation of it, is where we flesh out strategies, how we're going to achieve the goals, who's responsible for them, and how we're going to measure progress, and all of that part.
Is it more like guideposts? I don't want to say a mission statement, that's too high level, but more cornerstones, or maybe that implies
Could be like five priorities, or
Yeah.
3 priorities, or, I mean, schools have done it, and it's really going to depend on the input that we get from all of our stakeholders, but usually it comes down to like 3 to 5 very clear priorities that we're trying to accomplish.
But then from there, you would
From there,
attach
there's goals and
for
strategies
all kinds of
that
people each year.
accomplish each priority, yep.
But the process of getting to even to that, to being
Yeah.
able to identify,
Is-
when you've got this much input coming in, right?
Yep, yep.
Is about almost, not quite a year long, but a 7-month process.
Just
or
the
whatever.
review of data, defining our reality,
Yes.
what are our strengths and weaknesses, what do we want to accomplish long-term, what are those goals? That is a year-long process.
And then, once we get past that point, when it goes to that level of how it's gonna be done, that's the information that you'll share then beyond that with the
Throughout,
board.
absolutely,
Yes.
throughout, yep.
Okay.
And we can do like updates throughout this year too, with the whole board to say, here's kind of January, we've done this, here's where we're at, here's the latest.
Right, so even after that point, then it can take another 5 to 6 months for
Sure.
strategies
Yeah.
and action
Yep.
plans underneath those goals.
Yeah,
Agree.
absolutely.
Yep.
I mean,
It's a process.
if it's,
It's a long
if it's approved
process.
in June, though, I mean, given that the next step is generally related to you and your team, and coming back with pathways to get to those.
Right.
Strategic goals as part of the plan. I mean, would you anticipate probably coming back early in the fall? If we approved it like May or June, and then would the summer then be the time?
I'm gonna make a prediction here that once we get adoption of the plan, we probably already are doing some things right now that work towards achieving our objectives. So there are strategies right now that we're doing or planning to do that will, without knowing what the priorities are gonna be and what input we're gonna get.
Sure.
Usually the way it works is we're already doing things that we can already demonstrate that we're
Right.
moving towards that. But yes, to your point, we're also going to really think critically about what new strategies do we have to put in place too to achieve those objectives.
Right. And if we can improve something by the end of the school year of 2022, I think, Michael, what you're getting at, and, longer, is that hopefully in the beginning of the 2022-2023
What are our
school
goals and
year,
how are we working towards
we
it?
have
Yes,
the action
yes.
plans of
Yep.
how we're going to start to attack those.
Yep, absolutely.
But having this roadmap is huge. I mean, it really
Huge.
is huge, because to your point, Julie, we didn't have anything on the.
Yeah, no,
site,
right,
and good
it's
to-
like, I'm thinking in other words,
Yes.
framework, it's a
Yes.
framework.
Yes.
It's that's catered to our
Mhm.
our broad community's goals, long-term. Okay, got it. Good.
Any other questions? Okay.
And obviously, feel
So-
free to email me if you have if you think of
Additional-
things in the interim,
Yeah,
shoot me a message.
but the goal here being that you'll present this Monday night
Next Monday,
with
yep.
us asking our
Asking for approval, yep,
for CEC
right.
on the.
And then
the
if,
action or
if
action
that, so the goal would be to do that Monday, and then I would immediately engage with CEC and start, identify who our consultant is, start working with our leadership team to identify stakeholder groups, the environmental scan, all of that.
And then to Allison's point, you'll be happy to share with us along the way
Oh,
how
yeah.
that's looking, because that would
Yep.
be, I think, really
Yep.
helpful.
And some of you are gonna be involved in it.
Right,
More
that too,
like
we'll-
intimately, but then also to share with the whole board as updates throughout the year, that would be
Great.
very good.
How's it sound? Okay? It's good? Okay, thank you. All righty, moving right along, guys. It is time to take us almost 8 o'clock. And next we have curriculum. Scott Egerton.
All right, just in case you are having flashbacks to last month and this calendar looks nothing like the one from last month, well, it doesn't look anything.
It doesn't.
So in the time between our last meeting and this meeting, the state let us know that because November of 2022 is an election year, we will have no school. We may not even be open or do anything in the building on the 8th of November, which, if you recall, we had really thin margins on that calendar to make everything balance evenly and finish before Memorial Day and kind of start a little earlier than maybe we wanted to in August, but it all sort of worked out. Well, that one day, we put together a few models, and this is really what, the more we thought about, fits best. A, what we've done in the past, and B, what is, allows for a couple of additional challenges that perhaps we didn't take into account fully as well. So everything on here that's either circled or highlighted is a change or an area where change happened from the last calendar. In the August, that rectangle, you'll notice that students don't start now till the 22nd of August. We've reinstated at this point the freshman experience day on the 17th. We are still looking at ways we can incorporate that into a first day of school where it can involve all teachers rather than those who volunteer for that day, and maybe even see what other schools have done with other students, even given that we have a split campus. Our juniors are brand new to this building as well, those kinds of things. So Jen Terrell's going to be looking at that for how we can make sure we not only ensure that our freshmen are walking in the door ready to go, but also that we're able to give them a really good experience. So we would be looking to start school on the 22nd, as we also started looking at the summer projects. We've got a very ambitious summer project schedule, so it doesn't hurt to give another 3 days for either finishing projects or cleaning the building after finishing projects, or cleaning areas around where projects will still be going on so we can have kids in the building. Right, so it all depends on kind of how things go. You'll notice then in November, we have that 8th is that day off. Again, it's a Tuesday. The last time that the state told us to do this, we took the Monday off. We're already at this point a 10-day difference between first and second semester, so we're not recommending to take Monday, the 7th off as well. The week before, we already had a day off, or we'll already have a day off in compensation for those parent-teacher conferences. And then obviously the 2 weeks later, we have 3 days off for Thanksgiving. So it's really not the time to have a mini break in the middle of other vacations. So probably need to do some things to encourage attendance on that Monday, but that's going to be something we'll tackle when we get to that. Does not change the end of the semester or the winter break. Those remain the way they were. Again, a lengthy 3-weekend winter break, 2 full weeks plus the day for the Institute Day. The other changes now don't come until the very end of the year. So by pushing things back 3 days, it pushes the end of the year also back 3 days. So ultimately 3 days after Memorial Day rather than finishing the Friday before. That being said, I can count, I believe, 3 times that we've finished before Memorial Day in the past. So this is a relatively new thing we've done. Usually we've finished into June, and in probably 15, 20 years ago, we finished into the second week of June. So again, this is not a major change. We are looking, though, to have that graduation then after Memorial Day on Wednesday the 31st, with the last day for all students on the 1st of January, teacher workday on Friday the 2nd. Summer school would be delayed by a week. That's just the fallout of having to bump things back. We've often started that late. That being said, it does push things into the 21st for the last day of the second session of summer school, which does make for a little shorter turnaround to the start of the next year for all sorts of different things. But we do tend to have most of our students, or the greatest percentage of our students, in that first part of summer school. The imbalance is, as I said, 10 days. That's the way it has been for at least, well, since we changed to the finals before winter break. It's always been a 10-day difference. So that being said, second semester does have a few days that are sort of messed up. We have an all-day SAT. We do some surveying. We have an Illinois science assessment for juniors. AP tests take up the bulk of 2 weeks. So second semester normally has, especially at North Campus, sort of a balancing act. At South, it's a little more of an imbalance. But that being said, that's what it looks like, and we are calling this a first reading because of all the changes. We didn't think it really made sense to say, you liked it so much last month, we changed it all, now we're going to approve it. So
We'll do that all again for the next month, is
We
send
better
it back
not.
to the community, get feedback on it.
I mean, last year we set records for changing the calendar, but I don't wish to do that ever again.
Blown away that one day makes this much
Me
of a
too.
change.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well, we
I think it really comes down to the fact that the previous one, it was so tight with where we were starting and getting done by Memorial Day that one day that we discussed the idea of being here on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. That's not a great option, so. This is really. No, it's like,
That was how you feel about it.
Right?
One year we did a Institute Day on Columbus Indigenous Peoples Day, and that people are still complaining about, and that's been at least 7 years.
Yep.
To that point, though, having just gone through, being off on Friday, off on Monday for Indigenous Peoples' Day, and also in thinking about like creating, and I don't know if this is something that that's a priority here, if there are other things that might flow into it, but really looking at is trying to accomplish as many full weeks of uninterrupted learning versus interruption in the week of learning and then another interruption in the week of learning. Was there any consideration to moving the Institute Day from October 7th to the Monday before the election day? Given that that kind of, could possibly take up that day, solve the attendance issues, and then also create one less week of interrupted learning?
We did not consider that. And my concern with doing that is twofold. One is, it's the first time that we get together once the school year has started with the entire faculty to work on training. So if we were to wait till November to do that, I think that's quite a long time. The second is that weekend, that Columbus Day weekend, is prime time for parents to go visit colleges with their kids. And to have those 4 days in October when colleges are catering to kids to do that, that's why we actually moved it to a Friday. We had been doing the Tuesday as Institute Day, and we kept hearing from kids and parents that if they could get out Thursday night, they could get to East Coast schools, they could get to West Coast schools, rather than just do a quick weekend. I totally understand your concern, though, about the full day weeks, or full weeks. What's really funny, though, is when you get into those months, like April, and you have 4 or 5 weeks in a row, the kids are like, when are we going to get a day off?
Oh, yeah, I totally get that, and I figured if there was, I just being in the position of having a junior and thinking about college visits now, I was like, I'm guessing this is one of the reasons that we do a Friday, Monday versus a Monday, Tuesday.
Yep.
But the wrench of the election day is, just.
It's frustrating.
And just, again, the struggles for Monday are gonna be huge.
We've managed for years with the election. We know how to cordon off our spaces. We feel safe. Now, a lot of the elementary schools have closed anyway because they don't feel safe to having community members coming into their gyms or their main offices. And so I think that's really what Springfield has heard. We have been, I guess high schools have been the rare schools that have been in attendance, but if we could just get election day to be like on a Saturday or a day that's not a Tuesday,
Right.
that would be great.
The other question, since this is what I had since it has flipped entirely, was there any consideration doing graduation now on the Saturday following the last day of school versus on a Wednesday night?
No, we really didn't discuss it, and we're going to try the midweek one this year, and would like to stick with that, so didn't really talk about that, about moving it back to the Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have any input, good or bad, so I mean,
Right.
at least after trying it, we might know something.
And, yeah, after this year, we could
different,
always,
But it seemed like the reason to have it on Wednesday was because it was tying in with when everything would be finished, and now
Yeah.
we're not, in that same.
Yeah, that, and I think it's also, if I think we got lucky this year with having it during the middle of the day on a Saturday. The weather was great, but traditionally in the middle of the day, it can be hot. So
Can't go near
having
pep
it,
parade, too.
what's that?
Can't go near pep parade.
Yeah, Saturday.
Oh, is it the pep
Saturday's
parade?
pep parade.
There you
Don't mess with the pep parade.
Right, right.
Pep parade.
I'll
So
I'll second that.
the evening graduation was something that we were really looking, but I guess we could do a Saturday night too if we
Yeah,
wanted to.
well, I mean, we've never tried it, so, I
Yep.
mean, this will
We'll
at
see
least
how it
give us
goes
some
and-
input to see how it goes. It just seems like the circumstances of why we were doing it on Wednesday have changed, but,
Yeah,
okay.
yep.
Okay.
Scott, can you remind us what the split was on the old, I'm trying to not be
pulled that up.
anchored on the old version, because it's
We were-
gone, it
we were
is not
88.
possible to have.
We were 88. It was beautiful.
88,
It was
okay.
beautiful.
And part of,
Which never happens, like, it's never that even.
And
Yeah.
I think to that point, like you really had me totally stoked about giving our electives or the semester only courses that same balance.
Yeah.
And I'm just so that they won't have that same
Yeah.
opportunity from an education standpoint to, have that balance.
is it fair to say part of starting late was hearing Andrew's feedback and teacher feedback? I remember hearing, I think at the last board meeting, that teachers are warm with the current, more than warm, hot in some of the classrooms and trying to be responsive to that. Also acknowledging, I looked at the calendar, I think October 1st or 2nd, it was going to be 87. So like
Right.
the 80s go on, but any reprieve from that was part of this, perhaps?
Somewhat, but there was also a feeling from the association, correct me if I'm wrong, that they didn't want to go past Memorial Day, so.
Okay.
Right, exactly.
I forgot that part. Thank you.
And I guess the only other, well, not the only other, because it was such a flip on our heads, but we did talk at length about the benefits, obviously, of having a shorter week for our students to come back to. And now we're back to
Right.
a full week. So there's not that same easing in. It's just jump right in, kids. So,
You did too good of a job of selling us
Yeah.
on the last.
I know.
you really did. I was-
It really, it does
I
always
think you
come down
guys
to
were
We could
one day.
petition
Oh, absolutely.
Springfield.
We were totally bummed.
Yeah.
But I guess let's just not lose that learning and what the experience was this year, moving in past next year, right? Like, just make sure we.
Right.
Even though we still have 5 days, even though, if this is the calendar that, we end up moving forward with, we can still talk about what's the social emotional aspects of the start of the year, what kind of fun activities can we
Right.
do? How can we continue to think about that moving forward? It's important.
Those freshmen in mind, too.
I like these.
I know you do, that's why I suggested.
We did move the open houses a little later too. People didn't like them as early, so. I didn't highlight that, but we did bump those a little bit.
Maybe
It
get a
does
little
feel like
cooler
we-
night for South Campus Open House than
Yeah.
we
It
traditionally
probably
do.
felt early this year, too, though, because of having been on the COVID year
Yeah.
before, and it just felt like,
And it
wait,
was
we're
like the
back
second
again?
week of
It was-
school,
it
the
was quick.
second,
Yeah, it
third
felt
week
quick.
versus third and fourth week, which was
Definitely.
quick. That was quick.
But we do have homecoming on here. We normally don't have that this early.
All right,
Homecoming's 24th.
so this is our first read.
So we'll do the same thing with this calendar as we did last month's calendar. We'll share it again, community, post it on the website. Feedback goes to Scott. See what we learn in the next few weeks.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. In the next item, the curriculum change proposals, there are no changes, so it's much better. But essentially what we have, the only thing we add for the second reading is an administrative recommendation. Again, that's just a part of our process. We want to make sure that we're vetting things at the central leadership team level, that we've taken lots of consideration into account, that there's been a public sharing of the proposals. We've had a chance to look at some of the impacts of the changes. These do not have major impacts in our structure. I mean, we don't have to build any facilities. The only one that will have some significant equipment will be the Intro to Healthcare Careers. That will require quite a bit of equipment, which we will be able to purchase through our CTIG and Perkins funding. Other than that, the courses are as they were presented, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on those.
I do have some questions.
Sure.
I had submitted a list of questions, and I appreciate the feedback, getting them back. But one thing I'm looking at with regards to the reading EL class is it was specifically stated when it came back, the response to the questions, what metrics would be used to measure the success of the course addition or change. And it had not been modified yet, but in the response that was sent back to me, it specifically stated that the access test was not the best measure. So I'm asking why that has not been updated to reflect that.
I can follow up with that and make sure that it's accurate for the board meeting.
And that's comparing their response to the curriculum packet, Jill?
Right,
Yeah.
because I had specifically asked about the access test, and what was written back was access is one data point, but it's not the best measure for the class success. And we will use Achieve 3000 benchmarking of Lexile, I'm probably not getting it right, Ames Web for comprehension and Maze for fluency, and classroom-based formative assessments to measure progress.
So essentially, we want to make sure the course description has that, or when it gets to the APG.
Yeah, there's a spot about metrics we can.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, why that had not been updated. And then, and when asking about how does the change address board goals or school initiatives, right below that, under the class description, I would just ask it just says to learn strategies. But and I know we had kind of talked about that, but what strategies, I'd like to see in here, what are those specific strategies outlined here? And lastly, I would be curious to understand what about this class has changed from the beginning reading EL. I know it's opened up to more students, but if it's still the same strategies and everything that is being done, what is more specific about this class that's going to make it different? And that's the top one, right under, I mean, not order, sorry. Or, why the change?
Right.
So, and I don't know if we're gonna get to this in November, but just a question regarding like the EL class itself, or this reading class. Like, so if you have some different languages in the class, then how is it structured that the teacher is being able to work across the different languages? Or is there like a barrier? Like, I just don't understand, like, how, if you have like 6 to 8 different languages in that class, like, what is specifically like happening?
That would be something I would definitely want to address next month when we report on how we do our EL programming, because this is a standard. Doesn't matter what the language is that the student speaks, the reading class is tailoring it to the individual needs of the student's learning of reading in English. So, yeah, there are some barriers, or, especially if a student is just new to the district, or they're new to the country, or they're new to learning English. So it is very different depending on the student. Sometimes we have a paraprofessional that supports. Sometimes we don't, depends on the needs.
But that is part of the agenda for November 8th, is a larger discussion around our EL program. They've just started to work on that presentation, put that together.
And Jill brought up a good point back to how, because we did talk a little bit about access being delayed and giving us the feedback that we needed to be able to assess the success level of our students in these courses. So what was the response again for what tests were we going to change to? You said Achieve? Is that-
Achieve 3000, Ames Web, Maze. There are a number of different reading tests, assessments that we can give. Some are tailored to EL students. Some are more just reading tests that we have EL students take.
So have we used these tests before?
Yeah, we have.
Okay, and so we're planning to use those as part of this.
Correct.
Just needs to be
proposal.
built into the description.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, we've used Ames Web and Maze with our humanities program and other reading classes we had in prior years, so they've been around for quite a while.
And that will provide a better, more timely assessment of our students where they are.
Correct.
back
And
to the
Achieve
parent.
3000 is more of a similar to MAP,
Okay.
so it has more. It tailors things to the students' answers. It's a little more sophisticated.
Yeah, because I think that was a big differentiating point too, it's like one thing what the state says, but we need to know what we're reflecting here for our own community, for our own students, and being able to address them, where they are right now.
And to have a better, like, if you're going to have, I mean, that's what I hope, on the next meeting when we
Yeah.
discuss EL, my understanding of the access is you're, supposed to have some growth in that. But what are we going to have to measure this? I guess that's for the class, that it hasn't been updated and it's still referring back to access. I'd like to see that updated to reflect a more accurate measure of a student's success in the class.
And access will still be used as a data point, but it won't be the data point, to your point. So I'll make sure to make that change.
And then one last thing, I just want to know, what's the classroom library for independent reading? Is that like, what does that look like? Is that a physical space or is that a prop?
Yeah, so we use funding, title funding, EL funding, to purchase high-interest reading materials for kids. And so they're
That's the
literally a couple shelves of books.
Got it.
And they might be about people's experiences coming to the United States. It might be, but the goal also is to make sure that you have Lexile levels that are more accessible to students. The challenge, and this is always the challenge with high school beginning ELs, is finding something that doesn't seem like it's for a fifth grader or a fourth grader.
right.
So there are some really good high interest, low Lexile books, and that we're constantly looking at those and trying to update that library. Because we would like our kids, especially in a reading class, to do independent reading as well, and do fiction as well as nonfiction, and so there's a broader range of it.
Is that something that we get to update annually, or is it kind of
The books?
yeah? And
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a classroom supply. We've been doing it in our prep level classes for the past 4 years. We've been ordering class sets or augmenting the class sets for the last 4 years of high interest novels and graphic novels of the Odyssey and things so that it's accessible to kids, maybe a little more high interest for them, but it is at an independent reading level, because there's in any reading program you're going to have the guided reading, but you also need the independent reading, and that's part of those other assessments. They measure those different components.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Scott, I guess we can move on.
So with those changes, that will be in
Second on Monday.
Monday.
Do a quick reset to get the projector going. Do you need me to turn it on, or can you? Does it work? Yeah, we just have to.
Clear the
Karen and I are
path.
gonna- yeah.
Yeah, we'll move.
Yep.
Plating of the seeds. That'd be nice.
I just want to quickly highlight, while we get the PowerPoint set up before Katie presents the assessment report, I just want to take a minute and mention that this is an annual report. It's designed to share student performance on standardized assessments that were taken by an entire graduating class, as well as AP exams, which we've also traditionally shared at this time of the year. We have a bunch of other assessments that we give throughout the year that are not included in tonight's report. PSAT, NM, SQT, ASVAB, NWA MAP, Seal of Biliteracy, Ames Web Plus, DLM, Access. There's a whole host of individual assessments that we also give. Those are taken for specific reasons by smaller groups of students. They're not included in this report, but certainly shared throughout the year in smaller reports, such as the access test, which will be shared in November, as long as we have the confirmed results back by November, but that'll be part of a larger presentation on the EL program. I also think it's important to note that, this year, Katie is in the process of putting together a data advisory team. As we just talked earlier tonight about the development of a long-term strategic plan, I have every reason to believe this report is going to be redesigned to really fit how we define success for all students. But tonight, this is just meant to be a snapshot of kind of what we traditionally present at this time of year, and hopefully provides a snapshot of LT student performance on standardized assessments that they took last school year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katie to walk us through this.
Good evening.
All right, so this year's annual assessment report is a little different than in years past. The same assessments are being discussed, but due to COVID-19, many assessments were canceled in the last 2 years or changed to such an extent that growth data is not available or extremely limited. And in some cases, performance data is available, but it's been delayed, so it should be here this month. So in 2 of the tests, you'll notice there's a blank line in the report, and that's because it could show up next week, and then I will have more to add before the board meeting. Before I jump into the school day SAT, I just wanted to point out that the Illinois Science Assessment data has not yet been returned for schools that chose to give the test this spring. So one of the things that also happened is many schools had a choice to give these assessments in the spring or the fall, which also questions comparative measures because that's a totally different experience, and kids have different curriculum under their belt at that point in time. We gave the ISA in the spring. That being said, it should be noted that that was a brand new test. So the Illinois Science Assessment has always been taken, but it used to be given to students taking biology. So this past class, it went to all juniors, and it was a assessment made up of 3 different sections, which assessed life science, earth-space science, as well as physical science, and then had engineering technology embedded throughout the test. So it can't be compared to prior ISA data because it was a completely different test. And I just wanted to get that out there now, just so you know when you do see it, that it's different.
Why do we do the ISA?
That's a good question. The ISA is part of federally, right? We have to give a science test, and so the science test is not included in the SAT, so that's why we have one in the state of Illinois. It also has, because of the next generation science standards, which were adopted not too long ago, the ISA has been redesigned to align to those standards. It's just that, unfortunately, until we have a few years of data, it's not going to mean much to us.
But that information doesn't mean anything to the kids specifically. They don't use that.
At this point in time, it does not.
Is the idea that it will start, I mean, is that the idea that it would be an extra data point for kids along with SAT, or?
I do not foresee it becoming a college entrance piece at all because different states have different standards in regards to science. I do see it being something that can benefit our curriculum and curriculum changes once the test has become a little more seasoned and that there's, a history of data.
And Katie, given that we were one of the few schools in the state that took it, I mean, what kind of state data would we even get back from that at that point?
So in March of 2020, we actually gave the test the week before school shut down.
Right.
And so those results aren't even being, we are one of the few that managed to get it in. But those results aren't even being released. This year, though, this past year, right, when our kids took it in April, a lot of students will be taking it, or just took it in September. So that data will be coming out and should be usable. We just have to be careful because it was 2 different testing sessions. Does that make sense?
And will it always be that, or will it?
No.
They'll set up?
No, there are so many accommodations made for the past year that there's just weird nuances that we haven't had to deal with before.
But previous to this year and the test changing, the ISA was used to, as you said, this will be used to inform our curriculum, to give us an idea of how our students are doing in science within the school, across the state, and so forth, right?
Yes, that
You
is
were
the idea.
using it for those reasons, okay.
It's also included as a measure in our school rating. The ratings were all suspended for the last 2 years, but it'll eventually be a component of our school rating. It's part of our ESSER implementation in the state of Illinois.
Okay, so this slide depicts the cancellation of the SAT suite of assessments due to COVID. And the class of 2021, which just graduated, does not officially have state SAT scores. The test was offered to them this past school year as seniors instead of juniors, but it was not mandated, so they do not have state SAT scores. The class of 2022, which is our current seniors, did sit for the test in April of last year. But for some, this was the first time they were on campus all year, wearing a mask for 4.5 hours and taking a test. So just keep that in mind. All right, so it's the class of 2022, our current seniors, that we're going to focus on in terms of the school day or state SAT. This is the assessment that is reported on our school report card. We cannot compare the class of 2022 to the class of 2021 because 2021 didn't officially take this test as juniors. So, and we want to be careful when we're comparing. I'm going to say, like, you shouldn't really compare last year to any year, but I'm going to be doing that. But the reason you shouldn't is because the school year was very different in terms of there were 525 less instructional minutes per week than every previous year, right? The format of instruction was remote for, the first 6 weeks and then switched to hybrid. So there are a lot of factors here that impacted instruction. But with the class of 2022, if we compare it to the prior years, the class of 2020, right, we'll notice that there's a 38-point decline in regards to the mean test score. LT outperformed the state and the total group, as it's always done, but this decline in the mean was a little steeper than in years before, so the decline from the class of 2020 to the class of 2022. The College Board also reports out what they call college and career readiness benchmarks. And their research, the College Board is engaged in a lot of research, and it demonstrates that students who meet or exceed their college and career readiness benchmarks, which is a 480 in evidence-based reading and writing and a 530 in math, have a 75% chance of earning a C or better in the first semester corresponding course of college. So when you see here the percentage of students meeting both college readiness benchmarks, that means that the students met the 480 in the evidence-based reading and writing, and they met the 530 in the math, or they scored higher. So you'll see that LT, 53% of the class of 2022 met both of those benchmarks. And again, it's higher than the state, and it's higher than the total group. But you will notice that it is quite a 13 percentage point decrease from the class of 2020.
Well, and also notable that the decline that we're seeing here at LT is outpacing the decline that we see in the state.
Absolutely. One of the things that I did want to point out about that is the total number of test takers in the state is 108,000 less than previously, for the total group. And the state test takers is significantly less too, because so many students, they had the option to take the test this fall. So you do have to note that part of the reason that decline is not as steep is because there's not as many students taking the test.
And also, what was our percentage of test takers?
94.
So we got 94%. Katie did an amazing job getting our kids to come in and take the test. That's not the case across the state.
Yeah.
So it's just, again, the data is so challenging to draw conclusions from, given so many things.
And I completely understand that, and we all know what last year was, and we all know that we have to look at this and look at these kids differently. Things have changed, absolutely changed, and to compare this cohort of group to a cohort of group from 2018, we can't necessarily do that anymore. Right. But yet, this is the data we have.
Yep.
So we have to. This is what we have to be able to pull on and pull from in order to understand how our kids are doing, and more importantly, what we need to do to help them achieve higher.
Okay, so what you see here is the College Board reports the student performance and benchmarks for both evidence-based reading and writing as well as math. So you see the reading and writing is on the left-hand side, math is on the right-hand side. This data, right, is in performance or in performance bands, right? So you've got the meeting is the score that the College Board has said is needed to get the C or higher in the comparable college course. Then the approaching, it's only got a 10-point window from a 460 to a 470 or a 510 to a 520. So note that's really small window for the approaching. And then you see the skill, they call it skills strengthening section, is what is considered to be the lowest benchmark there. Compared to 2020, there was a 50% increase in the percentage of students in the lowest benchmark in math for LT. This could be due to the 525 less instructional minutes. It could be due to the fact that these particular students had remote learning for their last quarter of geometry, and 40% of the SAT is geometry. It could be due to hybrid learning. It could be due to testing online because they had taken tests for the last year and a half online in their classes, but this particular test is on paper. It could be the lack of a calculator. So there is a math section that doesn't allow the calculator in the SAT, whereas there's a portion that does allow the SAT. And it could just be lack of exposure to the format because these students hadn't had the PSAT 10. So it is worthy of noting that while English went down, or the evidence-based reading and writing section went down as well, the math decline was pretty steep.
And also some declines across all of the groups. It looks like, I'm looking at I'm looking at a different format that you had in our packet, but even, even a decline in the 5-year analysis in the MET and in the and then in the approaching and the strengthening skills. So I mean, like, again, completely understand, and this is what we've got to work with, but in general, as we go through the data, I'm starting to see a little bit of a trend already that looks steeper in math, but it's there in both areas, it looks like.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it is steeper in math, though.
Yeah.
All right, so one of the things that we can do is we can look at the class of 2022 in terms of performance against itself, right? Because our students did have a similar instructional experience. And I've only pulled out some things to kind of highlight tonight, by the way, but what you see up here on the screen is the class of 2022 broken down by various population groups. And this is the evidence-based reading and writing section of the test. And you'll see that I've put a total mean column on here, as well as the percentage of students in each population group that are meeting, approaching, or in the skills section. So just a few things to note here is that the mean for the class of 2022 is 1093. And that's both sections of the test added together. But when you look at the mean by different population groups, it starts to change dramatically. It goes down 290 points for English learners when they're compared to non-English learners. It goes down 229 points for Black students when compared to all students, and the mean of 1093. It goes down 234 points for students with an IEP when compared to those that don't have an IEP. And it goes down 198 points for free and reduced lunch and 121 points for Hispanic students. And it increases for white students by 41 points. So there are some significant differences here. And then if you also, what I highlighted in purple is if a population group had more than 50% of their entire population group performing in the lowest band, I highlighted that in purple. And you can see here, and this trend continues on the math section, but actually expands a little in math. Black students, economically disadvantaged students, English learners, and special education students had more than 50% of their population landing in the strength and skills section of the exam.
Katie, is it possible to provide some sort of historical view of this data? I mean, maybe not every single point up there, but give us some high-level historical data of our different subgroups?
I can. I've definitely reported out on it in past board packets. I've actually done the history. This time I didn't because of just the differences in years past, so I can definitely provide that. The achievement gap has been there. It's been there for a few years. There are some steeper declines this year than we've seen in the past, but it is pretty reflective of what's been happening for the last few years.
Yeah, if you have it and it's not inordinate because you've had it in the past, this is really critical, important, phenomenal that you're just aggregating in this way, and I think just capturing that historical piece is also a kind of important view, especially since all but two of us weren't here last year for the prior presentation.
Absolutely, I have it, so I can put that
Thank you
together.
so much.
I was looking at this a bit last night and noticing, I'm not a data scientist, and I know data can be interpreted differently and I think can be dangerous, right, if you're not really an expert to understand all the components. But if I just look at the purples that you've highlighted for us, one thing I guess I'm trying to say this right, like encouraged by is some of the areas represent, your parentheses in population group, very small populations relative to a 1,000-person class, right? So I'm hopeful that there can be some targeted work that's not, so daunting that it's across hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students. Perhaps it's across these 24 students or these 94 students. And then you kind of see a similar trend, and maybe this is just what data always does. If I look at Asian 26 students, multiracial 25 students, they're outliers to the positive. They're bringing the averages up, as opposed to being whatever the opposite of purple might be on the schedule. And again, I'm just,
Yes, no,
maybe that's just how
absolutely,
data works.
absolutely.
that
The
small
only problem with
population.
the SAT is that it's like an autopsy report. Unfortunately, these students don't test again, so you can't pinpoint the specific students to provide an intervention, right? You can make generalizations about the population group, and typically we would be able to see the PSAT 9 and the PSAT 10. And then we could intervene before we got to the SAT. Unfortunately, that's not the case right now because of COVID. So that's kind of where we're at, but you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that's a great point. And to your point, Brian, of all the assessments that you said that you additionally do, I'm assuming quite a few of those assessments are going to be targeted to certain areas of students that we, and I mean, in any case, we would not wanting to be looking at one single data point, one single test.
No.
We want to develop a portfolio of understanding student performance from a variety of, multi-levels and multi-sources. So, this is an important one point that we need to see how it pairs up with the other points that I'm sure you're gathering.
Right, but can we also see from a population standpoint at some point, the average GPA against the different populations in the different grades, because that will also help to determine and help to identify earlier where there may be significant gaps. And a part of that, I think we all know, is how students of color are coming into Lyons Township, into prep and lower, and so the rigor isn't there at the beginning. And so I think with the GPA, that can also help to show a broader perspective, and then especially as those grades are going up, you can kind of identify where there can be further interventions per se.
Yes. GPA is something that we definitely look at by all population groups. It's just not included in the standardized report, but I appreciate the point and do agree with you. In terms of the math section of the test, you'll see a few more subgroups here, or population groups have been highlighted in purple because we have more groups that have more than 50% here in the lowest category. I did inadvertently highlight 504, where it's 46.7% instead of 50%, but it's awfully close, so apologize. All right, one of the things that I wanted to point out, which is a little strange, is that there is a difference between what the College Board declares as being college and career ready and what the state of Illinois declares as being proficient in skills. And so we see when you get, as a parent, when you get the score report home from College Board or you access it online, right, you see your student's performance according to their benchmarks. The state of Illinois reports out on our school report card performance as it relates to Illinois' benchmarks, and they are different. So you can see here that you have to have a 480 on the evidence-based reading and writing test for College Board to be considered career ready. But in Illinois, it has to be 540. So that's quite a difference there in terms of that test. Math is a little closer in terms of there's only a 10-point difference, but that can be one problem. It can be two problems depending on where you're scoring in the test so far and which problems you've missed. In terms of College Board in Illinois, you can see down there, if we were to calculate this by College Board, right, 53% of our students met both benchmarks. But the state of Illinois' benchmarks, 45% met both benchmarks. And just to put numbers on it here, you can see that I broke down the number of students from the class sitting in each category. And according to the College Board for Evidence-Based Reading and Writing, 727 students are career ready. 539 are, if you're looking at the state's level 3 and level 4. For math, 542 met for the College Board, and for the state it would be 511. So there are slight differences there that's worth paying attention to when you look at the school report card.
And Katie, is there, on that, is there anything that the state is saying? So the College Board is saying that at meets or exceeds, we expect 75% of them to be truly college ready. Is there any correlation from the state level in those 4 levels, or no?
So the state, when they created their ESSER plan, they needed to select targeted areas that they wanted to make improvements on. And so they took the SAT data and then matched it up against the existing score data that we'd already given for SATs. Based on that, they came up with a formula, really, if nothing else, as a goal. And so what they're doing as they go through these rating systems, which have been suspended, is they're ratcheting up the percentage each year that each group and each subgroup has to meet in order to be proficient as a school. So they keep changing the goalposts, whereas College Board keeps them at the same spot.
Okay. Thank you.
But their goal is to get, as an incentive, for us to make greater improvements.
Sounds very familiar.
I did a very good job being diplomatic about it.
Yes, sounds very familiar.
All right, so our students also take the national SAT. The difference between the school day and a national SAT is that the school day SAT is given junior year during the day. It's required for graduation. The national SAT is any test that they register on their own to take on the weekend. And so when a class graduates, we get an average, right, and we get a score report basically for that class. So a student who takes the test multiple times, their most recent score is considered in these averages that you see. This is what goes on our college profile and is sent with our students' transcripts and application when they apply to college. And you can see here that LT does have 40% of the students sitting in the highest 2 score bands, which is significantly higher than both the state of Illinois and the total group. ACT, it's no longer a state required test, so you will notice that the numbers of students taking the ACT have gone down each year. While the numbers, obviously, with the SAT have gone up because all students do take it their junior year. What we are going to continue to see is as the numbers go down here, our average is going to continue to climb. And this used to be backwards because the ACT used to be required during the school day and the SAT was optional. So we'll continue probably to see that climb just a little higher before it evens out in terms of our composite score on the ACT there. Okay, AP testing. A few things to note about AP testing. In the spring of 2019, right, it was what is considered a normal or traditional AP testing format, right, where there were paper tests and they took every paper test, right, has a multiple choice section and also a constructed response section. The extent of how many essays they have to write or how long the constructed response is, that varies drastically in regards to what subject of AP exam they're taking. Additionally, if they're taking a world language exam, then they are also, there's a speaking and listening portion where they're recording. Same thing with music theory. In the spring of 2020, right, that's when things shut down quickly. College Board quickly put together a computer-based test, but it was only constructed response, and it was significantly shortened constructed response sections from previous tests. So comparing 2020 to 2019, it's a different test in its entirety. Additionally, how it was scored was completely different too. When you look at the spring of 2021, just this past test, or past season, schools had options. And they could choose between three windows of tests. Option 1 was everything was paper-oriented tests. Option 2 was 13 of the tests were on paper, which were mostly science-based tests, world language tests, and math tests, and the rest were on computers. And option 3 was everything was on the computer. So we chose option 2 because we felt that it honored the fact that some of our math tests are best taken with pencil and calculator, but also it allowed students that were remote to remain remote. So that was the choice that we made. But again, it should be noted that the format of the tests, right, were not the same as all students taking the AP tests across the country, and different forms of the tests were given on each testing window.
And the three options were given in different times of the month.
Yes.
So some schools chose to do all online for option 3 because you had an extra 4 weeks to prepare. And if you did all paper, you were the first up.
All right, so this is the AP data in terms of the number of tests taken and the number of students taking tests. So we saw that in 2021, we had 1,166 students sit for AP tests. They took a total of 2,244 tests, and 72% of those tests were passing. This is the lowest passing rate LT has seen to date, but again, there are some significant differences in the way instruction was delivered last year, which definitely impacted AP testing performance. And you can see that in 2020, right, the year prior, there's just a slight difference in 2 students testing, so we're very similar in terms of the numbers, and 150 fewer tests when compared to 2020. One of the things that College Board calculates is the percentage of equity and excellence. And this means that really it's the percentage of students that graduate from a class having taken and passed at least one AP exam. College Board has done a ton of research, granted it's their own, but they have done a lot of research to show that students that take and pass at least one AP exam during high school are more likely to graduate in 5 years than their peers that have not taken and passed at least one exam in high school. Additionally, success has been seen more in college by students who have taken and passed AP than those who have not. And there's a rigor involved in AP classes that's comparable, and that's part of what leads to that success. So you can see here that we hit a peak of 49% of our graduating class in 2019, taking and passing at least one AP exam. That's declined with the last 2 AP testing seasons, last 2 classes. And it's hard to know what has led to the decline exactly, because that could be the impact of COVID. It could also be the fact that we now have dual enrollment courses. And so last year, right, we had a lot more students opt to take English as dual enrollment and Spanish as dual enrollment. So those students wouldn't have taken an AP course because they took the dual credit class. Does that make sense? Okay. One of the things I do think is very valuable, since some of the testing data is questionable in regards to comparing it because the format of the AP exam was so different, is enrollment data in regards to AP. What you see in the light blue column that says total population that is our current population, LT population, broken up into the population groups that you see on the left-hand side. So of our current students, right, 4,013 is what this was based on. 68% are white, 2.9% are multiracial. So that's how you read that. And going over, right, you can see the percentage of white students is 81% in 2016 sitting in AP classes. Okay, currently, if I go all the way to this school year, 79% of the students in AP classes that are enrolled in AP classes are white. And so if you go up, right, you can see the percentage of each population group sitting in AP classes this year. Ideally, you want the enrollment in your AP classes to reflect the enrollment of your total population. And you can see here that our enrollment in regards to Hispanic and Black students is lower than our school population enrollment. Does that make sense? So that's something that I would love to see us strive to improve. I think everybody in this room would. So that's something that we can actually gain from this past testing season. The other thing that's really worth noting here is that, granted, this was this past spring, but I was looking at the percentage of passing by population group. And again, right, this information confirms that there is in fact an achievement gap. But specifically when you look at this data related to the class of, or the season of 2021, you can see there's a significant number of students that were Black and Hispanic, a third, really, that opted not to take the test at all, whereas it was about a fifth for the other population groups up there. So my first question is why? Why do they not even take the exam? We don't know the answer to that, but that's one question out there. And then if you look at the percentage of passing, right, which would be a 3, 4, or 5, you can see that it was at least 50% passed in regards to the students that were white, multiracial, or Asian, whereas 21% of the Black students that took AP tests passed, earned a passing score, and roughly 38% of Hispanic students. So again, there's a lot of work to be done here. So that's kind of where I've concluded things in terms of highlights from the report this past year. Are there any questions at this time?
Comment and request.
Okay.
This type of data and the way you've depicted it for us, the level, the way you've disaggregated it for us when appropriate and doable is very powerful, very important, and thank you so much for doing that. I guess the request would be, there's so much of it here.
I know.
And I know this is just a piece, but it's an important piece to look at, and I know we'll be looking at others as well. The request would be to just pull out for us a summary of, I mean, I can look at it and interpret one way. You guys are looking at this much more closely than I am, and I think any of us are. But if you could just pull out the high level areas of where, you know, we've got some issues we need to take care of. There's things that are on the radar. You highlighted many of them as you went through, but I know, I know there's more. But just a summary of what that looks like, that will help us, I think, in strategic planning as well, when we, look at academic performance. And again, I realize this is just one piece, but it does give us one piece of the story.
Down to your point, I think the strategic planning process is really key to what we do with this data.
Yeah.
This is good data to have, but we need to figure out what our goals are going to be so that we can then collect that data, and rather than sort of, let's look at things and see what we understand. What are we going to do? What are our goals? What are our outcomes? What are we going to measure? And then how do we make sure that we're, pursuing those things that we want to make sure we make a change in?
Absolutely.
Again, because a lot of this is, again, it's a terrible term, but it's autopsy data. The kids are done. We can't do anything to change. So we're looking at it and going, what will we do next for the next group? But if you keep doing that, you're constantly saying, well, sorry, kids, we're going to work on the next group. So that's where we need all this data. And as we get into these data groups and we start working through this process to distill it down into what we need that's useful, as opposed to, I wonder what this would look like, or I wonder what that would look like. That's where we want to go away from and really move toward, what do we want to do, and let's find the data that measures it.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you. I think,
Yeah.
it's a lot of data, and I'm pretty intimately aware of all this data, and there's times you got to say, okay, what's the difference between this chart and the last chart, and why is this one there? And it's tough.
I was going to say, like, in identifying which of those data points define success for students in our school community.
Yeah.
It's an important part of the discussion.
Yeah, the strategic plan and absolutely should really start to form the framework around what we're looking for in academic performance. But there's definitely, a lot of value points in here that can be drawn out, and I think will help inform that process. And I lost my other point, so I'll come back to it, but I think of it.
Sorry, I interrupted
No,
you.
no, you didn't interrupt me at all. No,
But if
no,
we're
no.
doing our job right, there should be less data that's more informative rather than more data that.
Yeah.
And I think, like,
what you were mentioning, Don, was something I was thinking too, like, I mean, you do know this stuff very intimately, and you're seeing this, so I feel like I look to you guys as the experts to be able to tell us draw those conclusions somewhat for us a little bit, and start making some connection points along the way. And we might have questions, of course, and maybe add value to a different way to look at it, but really, yeah, to me, that was a little bit of a missing piece of it. I loved having all this data, but I wanted to hear, like, from your perspective, what should we be getting out of this that you guys would want us to be, paying attention to, what changes.
And also how this aligns with the other pieces. So to Michael's point about looking at GPA, and you said, I mean, clearly that's a valuable point to look at. Anytime we can look at cohort groups as they matriculate through, that's a valuable exercise. But I know you guys, I know you're in the trenches and all of that, so I'm sure where these trends and some of the things that we see here are aligning with other things that, again, when we look at a student academic portfolio, not just one point, I know you have the data that kind of represents, yes, what we're seeing here. We also see in 2 or 3 other points, so it's valid. We should be looking at it.
Just my 2 cents, this is so darn depressing. I'm sorry, this stuff is just awful. And so, I just want us to remember this feeling when we're going through the strategic,
It's our current
plan.
reality.
And we have got to make some monster moves here. I mean, I don't know I don't know the answers to how to do it, but it's not getting the kids into the classes, it's getting them to
It's the push
succeed
to
through
access
it.
that we've talked about. It's the, we're going to find out here very quickly. We've been saying for the last year that belonging precedes achievement. And we're going to find that out, right? Because we've put a lot of efforts towards the belonging piece, and we're going to continue that. And that should, we're going to find out if that's true.
Well, and there's other things that we have to assess alongside of that as well. I mean, some of the trends that I look at, I'm seeing in multiple groups.
Yeah, right.
One thing I did think of that, is there, on the AP data, is there either state data or nation data that we can look at how LT is doing against the state and the nation? And do we have any, or you could give us some historical data?
So I give you the historical data here. College Board has put out a 2021 distribution per course because it was so varied in regards to just this past year. Some courses took a real dip. And so I did look at ours compared to those, and if there was a reason to be concerned, I did mention that in the book. But in terms of state data specifically, no, I'm sure.
Okay. And all this also points to when we talk with COVID, we and Scott, you're going to cringe when I say this, but it is what it is, right? We all agree that the students that you all are teaching today, even though they're the same 2 students that were here last year and last year, they're different students. It is what it is. At some point, and I don't know what the answer to this, and sorry, Scott, but at some point, how are we figuring out, before we just wait for another SAT in the next year's assessments, how to assess what these kids lost along the way, and how to address that sooner than waiting for it to come back next year on some of these assessments, where it's just like, okay, well, how do we assess it and target it now if there's even a way? I don't know.
Well, I mean, one of the things is we need to get back into a PSAT 9, 10, 11. So we have kids who never saw an SAT before, and they took an SAT at LT with a mask for 4 hours. So again, yeah, but they weren't ready for that. They weren't ready for that experience at all. That was the first time they set foot in the school for some of them, right? So that's not how you prepare a kid. I was on a webinar today put on by the Chronicle of Higher Education with 4 admissions officers. And this, what are you looking for out of the senior class? I mean, these SAT scores are terrible. There's over 1,000 college optional schools now, so a lot of kids aren't even taking the SAT. Illinois, we make every kid take one. That's not true other places. To your point, they're looking at GPA. They want to look at a GPA. They want to see that a kid has a demonstrated history of success in school over a long term, and they know that that SAT is a quick snapshot, and that even that is suspect. The other thing that was a little depressing is that even the schools that said they were SAT optional, they do buy the lists of the addresses and phone numbers of every kid and emails that takes the test, because that's how they try to target kids. So there's a lot of undercurrents to some of this. It's a little, doesn't feel right either. But to your point, yeah, we need to make sure that the kids understand the test, have had a chance to try the test, that our teachers perhaps are even giving test-like examples of the grammar situation and some of those things. Again, lots of stuff we can do, but again, we need them. We need that extra 500 minutes a week. We need all those other things that we lost. So, and we can't just say, "Oh, whew, COVID's better. Our test scores will be better." Right? We want to use this as, okay, this is where it ends. This is as low as it gets. Now, what do we do to build from here?
And to that point, one of the things that the College Board does offer is they have some pretty good information around types of questions that were missed most frequently. And so our math science chair has already tapped into that and is looking to see what kind of pieces in math need to be reinforced. And that happens with grammar every year. We look at that piece to rebuild that into both our prep classes and also look at English curriculum. So those pieces are happening.
Yeah. The GPA, back to the GPA, and I'm looking at the GPAs and Michael's question with the GPA. And again, changes were made to the grading policy and during the COVID year, which, again, there's a lot of factors that flow into last year, but I think that would be important to revisit. We saw some grade distributions from first semester, but we didn't see anything from last semester. I think that would be an important topic for us to revisit, especially given what you just said about grade point averages and understanding that I'd love to see how things ended up last year. And then, of course, as we roll into quarter one, finishing up, and then semester one finishing up, I think that would be an important thing, for us to backtrack on and to keep an eye on. I don't know if you all feel that way.
Yeah.
This is super challenge. I'm trying to think of it's not exactly a question, but sort of a question. How do we all, whatever the collective group, appropriately respond to, I don't want to say flawed data, it is the data, but with all these, I'm going back to like junior high science, too many, I don't remember if it was the X or the Y variable, too many variables, right? They've never seen the test, they had COVID, they might have had a family situation, they might have set so many variables that we could have never comprehended. How do we appropriately respond without under-responding and without overreacting, or over-responding? And maybe there's no harm in over-responding because there's always needs, and you look at it on an absolute as opposed to a trend. There's always room for improvement. But how do you guys weed through some of these factors to try to find the balance, and to everyone's point, keep helping the kids that you're instructing each year and each day?
Well, you're asking, like, how do you respond to questions from people who are asking questions about the data or about programmatically what we're doing to help students?
Like, it's so, again, bias or whatever. It's so, no one here has sounded dismissive of, oh, don't look at what we're presenting because, well, it was COVID, or, oh, because people haven't seen a test. But I don't know I think it's literally impossible to assign, if there's I don't remember the percentage gap. If you assign, well, half of it's because they've never seen the test. Well, that seems like too much. I mean, we're all going to, how do you not sound dismissive because it's, and you're not, because it's this weird year, how do you take action without deciding that the sky just fell and everything's broken? Like, where's the balance to, and is it just coming back to any step is a good step, and so let's start making steps?
Well, I think we all, like, administratively, we all have phone calls and talk with parents and community members about this topic, right? About sharing the data, sharing strategically what we're doing and how we use it. And Katie talked for a few moments about math science teachers using the data, and English teachers. And then, like, for example, with the achievement gap, like the efforts we've made over the years we talk programmatically about that and knowing that we have to formalize that in a much more intentional way to provide access to students so that our highest level courses, our advanced placement courses, dual credit courses represent our school. So that's how we respond to it. We explain very specifically, whether that be through small groups or through phone calls, basically what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we look for trends. I mean,
Yeah,
if we're starting to see that our free and reduced lunch kids or our Hispanic kids are constantly the ones that are in whatever bucket we don't want them to be in.
Okay.
And that's true of GPA, and that's true of standardized tests, and they don't show up on AP scores, and they're not in our high-level courses. Well, that's all pointing to something that we can take action on,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
So it's not like we're gonna make sure every Latinx kid gets extra SAT test prep so we raise the SAT score, but maybe we do want to offer some SAT test prep that's in Spanish for our kids. So I mean, again, these are all things that we
Yeah,
just have
okay.
to start weighing is where's our biggest bang for our buck. There was a time with ACT when if you weren't in an ACT prep class, we made you take one during your study hall, right?
Oh, okay.
It didn't really overall affect our ACT scores, and it made a lot of people unhappy, but that was we saw that as a need. We tried it, we targeted it, we did it. So, I think all those things, how can we use our lunch study better? How can we use support rooms better? Do we need a different type of support? Is there something we can offer during late starts? Is there, all those sorts of programmatic things that have to lead from what is our goal? And once we sort of nail that down from looking at this kind of data, we can say, okay, now we're going to really focus on this group, or we're going to bring in this other group that's really good at this thing to help us understand this other piece. You'll hear some of that next
Okay.
month with a group that we're bringing in to try and help with our representation in some of our courses and to find out students' goals. Those are things that we want to make sure that we're doing so that it's proactive and not reactive.
Right. So, I mean, I also think too, it's not lost, like, the scores with students of colors, it's historical. This isn't
Yeah,
like,
this is
this
kind
isn't like new. And then, two, it all starts too at the beginning. So there are things that we can do when students are coming in from the middle schools, junior highs, associate schools, that in placement, then you can start to see, and what can we be doing there at that point, at the beginning? And I don't think that has been explored.
It is something we've talked a ton about, and that's, but it's absolutely something that as we look to where we think we can make the greatest impact, if we do need to look at level placement freshman year, if we need to look at the entire freshman year, I think we have to have the courage to do that to meet the needs of the kids, as opposed to we're going to keep a tradition or we're going to make sure that we keep doing what we've always done because we're getting the same results.
Right, and or what other supports levels that can be put in place to help to increase the rigor at that time
Right.
as well.
Do we differentiate more? Do we, do we look at other ways of delivering curriculum? Do we have too many options? All those are big questions, and you want to look at successful schools and the changes that they've made, and you want to look at, the changes that may or may not work here as well. There's, you're also rubbing up against tradition a lot of times that make things challenging to make changes with.
I just wanted to jump in with that piece, because this has been, again, the conversations the questions that you're asking with our team that someone like me has been involved with. And I think also when we're talking about that achievement gap, opportunity gap, it's also some of that teacher knowledge gap. And it's how are we supporting and helping our teachers? So Katie and I have been really involved in some of the work right now for me, even like looking at this data. I put it in a grant, and we're having a whole team of teachers are working on just teaching for Black Lives. What does that look like? Just having that conversation and saying, are we meeting our kids and supporting them when we're talking about allowing our students to achieve? Are our teachers prepared for that? And so we have, over 30 teachers who signed up just specifically to talk about and to learn more about meeting the needs of Black children. So that's the kind of work that we're starting to do, and it's really reflective, again, of this data, like having the desire but what is that gap? And it's not just focusing on the children, but it's helping our educators be able to get the information and knowledge they need so that they can support those students, so building that bridge. So that's the kind of work already that we're starting to do with me coming in, for example.
Awesome, thank you. That was
Katie,
insightful.
another question about the AP scores and just just the amount of kids not taking the tests. I was surprised by how many, it's not a third, but it's almost a third of the kids aren't taking that. Is that a COVID year? Is that normal?
So it's higher than it has been. So typically, we do see quite a few come in, and they will drop one test or several tests, and every time they drop a test, we have them fill out a form as to why they're dropping the test. And the most frequently cited reason, usually is from seniors, is that they now know where they're going to college, and their school will only take a certain score, or they've already earned the credit that they could get because they took AP English junior year, and so taking the test, AP English senior year isn't going to do them any good. This year, we saw a ton more kids come in, not at the senior level, and drop exams. So there was quite a few at the junior level that dropped tests this year. And when asked to cite the reason, it was, lack of preparation or studying for another exam. So we saw, and there's a piece in there, but you could see that the U.S. English language and the physics exams all took more than a 30 number test hit. And that's because, at the junior year, it looks like most kids dropped at least one.
Also, with that second test window, it puts you closer to the end of the school year than we had in the past. Usually there's about 2 weeks, and this time there was just that last week. And if you had to do a makeup, some of the kids were just looking at their own, what they needed to do to finish their coursework versus the AP tests. I mean, so again, there were a lot of variables there too. The College Board 2 years ago also changed it and made you pay for your tests in November. As opposed to waiting till spring. And that's changed refunds as well. Because the kids all think they're going to do it, or we have some who don't realize if you don't sign up, then you can't take the test. So we have kids who don't take the test who want to, but because they're unable to.
It's interesting you said that, because I was almost wondering if that impacted the number of students that actually sat for the test because of that early, I can remember, I think, for myself one time, I was like, wait, what? To pay for this test now in November, but you won't take it till May?
Yeah.
And so I wondered if that might impact, because if you miss that.
Yeah, there's a lot of cynical responses to why they're paying in November.
Yeah.
Interest income.
Might be something to investigate and drill down, because there are, I think, a lot of factors that play into this, so.
And then the other question I have is, there's really specific, and I don't know again if this is a 2021 thing, but the courses, it seems a little bit obvious of which courses, we're not passing, we're not getting there, we're not at 3, 4s, and 5s. And so, is that because of this year? Was that historically the trend of you see physics we're dramatically not making it.
It was a huge anomaly this year. The percentage passing took a major hit for the course we were throwing to, and I put a list of the courses that took a hit, but there's not a trend there. I am watching trend lines and have been, but those are all just this year. And then I did look up those classes on College Board site to see the score distribution, and physics has we perform better than the percentage of 5, 4s, and 3s cited internationally. So that is just something that I think this particular year saw across the board.
AP Physics 1 has the lowest pass rate of any AP test.
Yeah, it was just,
In general,
dramatically, and then you kind of go, why would you take the test if I'm not going to go 3, 4, 5?
We also don't require a student to sit for the test to get the honors credit. There are some high schools that only award honors credit if you sit for the test and get a 3 or higher, otherwise you get college prep credit. That involves a lot of subjectivity that we'd rather not go into. But it does, you know, when kids get down to the end of the semester and they're weighing their options and they're in 4 or 5 AP classes and they're like, you know what, I'm just gonna do these 2. I mean, you know, sometimes that's a lot of variables.
How are we doing, guys? Good? Okay, and despite what the data shows us, this is a pretty impressive report. I mean, the information and it's very,
Information is awesome.
very, very well thought out and very detailed and it's easy to follow, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Is this accessible to anybody through the website, or will it be, or is it traditionally?
We could make it, I mean, it's in the packet, it's on the board website, so we
Yeah.
could make it accessible in another part of the website as well, if we wanted to.
Yeah. It's a strategic plan,
Yeah.
too. Okay, I think if we're good with that, guys, we can move on to our final, last part of our meeting, and that's public comment for non-agenda items. I think, Marilyn, did we have one more?
We had one person submit something online,
Okay.
and that person communicated with me that they would just like it read. They're not here this evening. No one completed a blue form prior to the meeting.
Okay.
And that person is Reverend Leslie Ritter Jenkins. It's not agenda related, and her comment is, I understand school boards across Illinois will be discussing IASB Resolution Number 2, titled Student Safety and Protection, submitted by Mercer County School District 404. I urge your delegate at the November IASB meeting to vote no on Resolution 2 and not allow school districts to arm their teachers. More guns in society and guns in school creates more danger, not less. Guns in school is not the answer. That's it.
All right, that's great. Thanks for everybody tonight. I guess time is now 9:21. With that, we can adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Night.